This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Adam Audio, Isotope, Native Instruments, and Grace Design. You're hearing my voice right now through the Grace Design M201 Mark II mic preamp into the Empirical Labs EL8X distressor mixed through Isotope RX, Ozone, Neutron, and Nectar, all on Adam Audio monitors. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the links in the show notes. It's a great way to help support this show, and we really appreciate it. Now, get ready to rock.
I think the most useful thing that anybody can ever do is pull out their little handheld device, put on the ruff, and sing along in your girly falsetto voice. Sing along with the ruff with your eyes closed and not thinking. Best way to find what I call the top line, the lead line, the violins, violin one. You always find it better with your voice than you do with your fingers on MIDI. Your fingers have their own patterns that they follow, but the voice is the most genuine one.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lij Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Adam Audio celebrates 25 years of designing industry-leading monitors in Berlin by unveiling the Arctic White A4V and A7V monitors, available for a limited time. With the XART ribbon tweeter design, customizable speaker voicings, and SonarWorks integration for room correction, these monitors deliver professional-grade sound perfect for Grammy-winning producers and home studios. Make your studio cooler than cool with the Arctic White A4V and A7V, available for a limited time with the standard extended 5-year warranty at adamaudio.com. Are you struggling to make your mixes sound professional? If your tracks feel weak, distant, or lack punch and clarity, I've got the perfect solution. My free course, Mix Master Bundle. This course will teach you how to achieve pro-level mixes from your home studio using free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. But these techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you use Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One, Reaper, or another. If you're ready to make your best record ever, go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started now for free. Find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Howdy, Rockstars. This is your host, Lij Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Brad Jones, a producer, engineer, mixer, and musician based right here in Nashville, Tennessee. With Robin Eaton, Brad has co-owned the studio Alex the Great Recording since 1994. I started recording there a few years later as an assistant engineer in about 95.
You were more than an assistant. You were our associate.
I was your
And a lot of times you were our Pro Tools teacher.
Right. We talked about that some on the last one, too. That's right. When
Don't
Pro
short sell
Tools
yourself.
first showed up. I delivered my last pizza, wrecked my car, and then finally said I got to get a real job and found Alex the Great. And Brad was the one who taught me the ropes of engineering and running a real session, which I'm eternally grateful to you for. Brad's credits include artists like Jill Sobule, Bobby Bear Jr., Butterfly Boucher, Hayes Carll, Caitlin Cary and Thad Cockrell, Steve Forbert, Government Cheese, Jason and the Scorchers, Josh Rouse, Ben Goldsmith, and the Shazam, to name just a few of the many artists he's worked with. Brad was an early guest on the show before for episode RSR461, episode 34, in the very first year I did the podcast, which we recorded over at Alex the Great, and I'm happy to have him back joining me now, this time from my new podcast studio, Ready to Rock Recording. At least that's a working title, thanks to James Tuttle. Maybe I'll call it Podzilla Studio. Maybe I'll call it Oh My Pod, OMP.
OMP.
What was yours? You
In Pod We Trust.
In Pod We Trust, yes. Oh, no, and Chris Shaw had a great one, which was Pod Damn It.
That's the best. Chris wins.
So please welcome back Brad Jones, the Recording Studio Rockstars. Brad, my brother, are you ready to rock?
I guess.
And that's another one, Ready to Rock. I think I said that, didn't I? Yes, I did.
I am prepared to commit rock.
Dude, glad to have you back on the show, man. There's so much to talk about. We were just wandering down to my recording music studio, the Toy Box. Luckily, we got dogs barking all through the neighborhood today with the sun coming out. And we just started chatting about stuff, and there's just so much to talk about, man.
Always is.
Tell us a little bit about what's going on with you now. Last time we talked about sort of my start over at Alex the Great. We talked about the studio some, shared a lot of great insights. What's new for you with the studio? That's always a good place to start. Is there?
Very little. You know, the studio, we stick with our old Pro Tools because it's not subscription model. I mean, we hang on to everything that works. We just hang on to it the way it is. And there's two reasons for that. One is that I'm a creature of habit and I want to forget technology and get straight to the creative stuff. And the less I can think about technology and having to relearn a new piece or get used to a new piece, the more I can focus in on that day's music instead. And the other thing is a little bit sentimental because it's a resident studio and people have stayed there for weeks on end when they're making their albums. They get sort of a comfort coming in after having been away for 7 years, and they walk in and they go, wow, it looks just the same. And they get this sort of glow. Yeah. And then they'll go, smells just the same too. I never figured out if that's good or bad.
I just thought it smelled good over there.
I'd like to think so.
You kind of smell
what
the wood.
The smell of old oxides from old tape that's still kind of floating around. I don't know what it is.
There was a thing in my studio when I had the MCI console and the tape machine where same thing. I could smell, the old, it's just something about like old 70s gear. It's almost like the oil in the old capacitors or something like that, Yeah. And I think it's a thing. Now I've modernized it. Now I'm like, it smells like glue or something. From modern fabrics.
Construction products.
Construction stuff, yeah. Tim Easton is somebody that you worked with a bunch. Tell us more about that. That sounds cool. Well, was it the actual record that he was doing down there?
No. Tim has made 2 different trips to Cuba just because he's a vagabond traveler. That's Tim's nature. But he would take a Zoom recorder with him. And then he also, the second time he went, he took a huge box full of guitar and bass strings that all of us had donated, various people donated, because Cubans can't get D'Addario guitar strings. They have to find an old piano wire and repurpose it,
Wow.
So he was a hero showing up on these sort of public plazas where guys are jamming and not only recording them and then sending them the stereo version of what he recorded, but handing out guitar strings to these guys. And he was a hero.
That sounds like a fun way to do it.
But those field recordings with all the dogs and roosters in the background, it's like, I wouldn't trade the dogs and roosters for anything. To me, it's part of it,
Very cool. And so was he bringing down new sets of strings, or is it like they were welcoming
some new
even used ones?
I think mostly new sets.
Yeah.
But I think I gave him a couple of used bass string sets.
Have you ever been in such a jam that you tried to restring the used broken guitar string? Use it again?
Oh, yeah. Well, shit,
rewind it around.
I started playing guitar when I was 12, and you can only mowing lawns and shoveling snow. It's like it takes you a week to get the dough to buy a new set of guitar strings. For me,
that's true. Those would be the two things
I was retying stuff. Yeah, I mean, all the time I was having to finagle stuff.
What was your first guitar?
Well, it was a brand new off the shelf $29.95 Kent, I think, or Conrad. But my first real guitar was
$21.
It was $29.95, brand new at the store that sold records. But they also had a couple of cheap solid body electric guitars in the back and a couple of trumpets.
Was it an acoustic?
It was a solid body electric. I'd been playing my dad's acoustic, but I wanted to get that fuzzy sound like I heard on the Hendrix record, so I put a piece of paper through the strings. I kind of weaved it through by the bridge, and that's what gave me my fuzz sound. And then someone tapped me on the shoulder and goes, you could buy an electric guitar and a fuzz box and get the same sounds.
That's great.
But my first real guitar was a melody maker, a SG-shaped melody maker that it was kind of touching how it happened. It was a want ad in the back of our local paper in this small college town I grew up in. And we went to the house, and it was this older couple, and they said, oh, yeah, it was Daryl's. And they took me to his bedroom, and it pulled it out. And only later did I find out that Daryl was a guy that went to Vietnam and didn't come back. And that's how I got his guitar.
Wow.
So only after the fact, I was too young to see the pathos in it, but now it's like it really hits hard when I think about that.
That is a heavy thought.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I was in his bedroom. They still had, the model airplanes were still hanging from the ceiling. You know what I mean?
It's interesting to think about all the used instruments that change hands in general, like when we get, vintage mics and guitars and like what kind of histories they've had. My U67 came over from Germany,
Yeah. And anything that people's, like a U67 ideally is not being touched. The mouth doesn't get, but anything where the fingers and hands have been on it, that's where the ghosts are.
Right.
Like the studio I was just at in Oakland, their talkback button was a repurposed telegram, like they used to do telegraph, and you'd see the guy in the films tapping this sort of big round like black button on his weird switch with all this 1907 looking wooden base, that was their talkback switch.
Wow.
But I got so vibed on it because every time I touched that sort of round, polished, sort of hand-worn disc that the guys used to tap, I sensed all the thousands of guys or thousands of hours of guys that had been touching that same button.
And what studio was that?
25th Street Recording.
Oh, the one you were just at recently?
Yeah, just at there. Just got back 2 days ago.
Yeah, so that's in San Francisco.
It's actually in Oakland.
Or in Oakland, yeah.
Yeah, but Bay Area.
That's cool. I know there were some cool stories about that. There was our mutual friend Robin Eaton. There was a little bit of a Robin connection, and
oh yeah.
Well, so do you want to talk about that experience a little bit?
You can just go down your list, whatever you wanted to get into today.
Let's start there. Although actually, before we can do both. It's hard. I jump around because I already want to pivot back to when you said you keep the studio the same. And I really like that idea of us understanding how important it is to. I learned this from you. It's like if you don't know where the little headphone adapter is, the small to big headphone adapter, you can't run your session. So you got to put things back in the same place.
Exactly.
And I guess another thing I learned is that it kind of doesn't matter what place you choose to put them, just as long as you know where it is.
Exactly. And same thing with the gear. It's like you might not have the sexiest compressor, but if that's a compressor that you know so well that you don't have to think about it anymore, that means that the whole time you're setting it up, your mind is still dreaming about art and music. Your mind hasn't had to switch over to technology mode. You can stay in the creative part of your brain the whole time. Your fingers just know where to go. So that's the kind of dream state that I like to stay in as long as possible. It's hard enough to stay in that dream state, even when things are going right, So that's part of my kind of philosophy on it.
Yeah, I mean, as far as that goes, like when we were down in my studio, you noticed I had those SSL controllers for my Pro Tools, and we're asking about that. I mean, to me, that's the ideal purpose for having them would be to
close
let
your
my
eyes.
fingers do the walking. Let's bring back the Yellow Pages, right?
Yeah, I'm all for it, man.
And just know where to find something to make an adjustment. Faders particularly. I mean, when I was at Alex the Great, of course, and I think you maybe still have it. It's the Mackie 32.
It's been under a blanket for quite some time, but it's a pretty good coffee holder.
But it was so
good place
fun
to put the keyboard on top.
Where the bass is. It's on that fader or whatever.
That's right. That's right.
And that made it easy to, just kind of make adjustments because, you don't want to have to, I feel like I have to switch my brain into computer mode and integrate with the computer and then switch it back into music mode. And it's not really fair.
That's true.
So another thing I remember is you brought back from one of your trips, you said, this is an Electro Harmonics Memory Man pedal. It's a great delay. And then you just plugged it in and it was always there. For
Still
mixing, there. Even though we had all plugins and all these other things starting to appear.
Yeah, you can do stuff with that you can't do with the plugin. One of which is having your hand on the repeat knob.
Right.
And so you can close your eyes and just twist it until you get the right, in real time. Harder to do with the plugin.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Yeah.
So it comes back to creative. With the actual gadget, you can get more hands-on, close your eyes creative with it.
Yeah, you closed your eyes with the computer and you accidentally just deleted your session. It just went into the trash or something.
Yeah.
Well, so then the other part of that question that I was thinking about is as I listened to your discography and Rockstars, we have Brad's playlist for you in the show notes. So please scroll down and listen when you're ready. You can pause and go listen to a record we talk about, or you can just wait till after the podcast and go listen. But the variety of cool instruments that are in your records, and there's a sense of, I think there's a little bit of a sense of unity in the instruments. Like you don't veer too far from the trod path, your well-trod path. But at the same time, there's a sense of like playfulness and experimentation. And so I wondered, relative to this idea of like, don't change up the studio too much, how do you apply that to the instruments themselves? Like,
That's always changing.
Like, are you constantly looking for the latest virtual digital synthesizer plugin, or how do you deal with that world?
No, but I am looking for some weird ethnic instrument that sounds really good with a slapback through that solid state amp that's over there in the corner. You know what I mean? That's kind of more the way I look at it. I'm not looking for the newer state-of-the-art stuff, because there's enough people that are making real sheeny state-of-the-art music. I've tried to position my sound in the last 10 years or so as being a little sort of willfully not shiny, a little more. I want the organics to show. A guy comes to me with a guitar overdub idea, and he's got his really nice Guitar Center Strat going through a really well-biased matchless amp. He showed me his idea. It's like, yeah, that's cool, but wouldn't it be cooler if we played that with an acoustic guitar and treated it somehow and not made it be a stereo split with your effect and just coming just a little from the left? It's very real, and you can see it in the sound stage. And that's been a lot of my thing, is seeing how much of it can I do with actual acoustic instruments that are revved up rather than electric instruments that are sheened out.
Oh, that's interesting.
Or like a guy brings me a synth pad. It's like, he demonstrates to me why that synth pad, those notes are really crucial to make the song work. And I agree with him. I was like, you're right. Those 3 notes you're playing on that synth pad really do complete the bridge. But instead of giving me the DI with the stereo of let's just make it be a mono output of and let's put it through that amp over in the corner and mic it from 4 feet away. So that instead of just being this vague thing that just sort of ghostly dances across our sound field and cancels out a lot of other stuff, we get the specifics of where it's coming from and what exactly it's doing.
Right.
That makes sense?
Yeah, it becomes a little bit more like a musician in the ensemble.
Right.
As a part.
Right. And I'm trying to make stuff visual in the sound, not just visual in sort of a Fantasia way, but visual in a soundstage way, meaning these 30 feet that are near me. You know, like to be able to picture the guys on the floor and where they're standing and how they're interacting with each other. That's, we're always trying to make things visual. It's a blind medium, but I'm always trying to make it as visual as I can.
Yeah.
Even though it's a blind medium.
Do you have a way that you think about like that whole soundscape and the panning of a song? Do you find that you just discover it while you're making the song, or do you try and have a sense as you go into the song of what? Well,
panning, I try to not think about panning until a little bit later, because I work a little harder when I don't pan stuff out. And I keep stuff central. It makes me work a little harder for volumes and EQs.
Yeah, I remember that was one of your tips to me, was like, work on it in mono and then pan it out and watch what happens.
That way you've earned it, But it's all kind of part of it. It helps me if it helps me to visualize the soundstage, I will pan earlier in the process.
So let's stick with that for a sec. So does that mean while you're working and layering overdubs and stuff, you just literally just kind of keep everything kind of in mono for as long as you can?
If you do, you're going to do tougher overdubs, because that synth pad that the guy gave you're going to realize, man, when it's just in mono, that synth pad sure does seem to be hogging frequency that the bass should have. I just need to do a high pass.
Right. And if you played the bass on the record, you better stay away from that bass partner.
That's right. But and I probably said this in the last podcast, but if you rely on panning to show the clarity between instruments, that's all fine and good when you've got someone that their ears are right between their 2 speakers. But for someone that's doing dishes across the room, it's
right. It's mono.
Won't help them.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because this whole topic of, the next stage of stereo, this concept of Atmos and immersive mixing, one of the things that people say they like about it is you don't have to fight so hard to fit sounds in, because now the sound is just going in that speaker over there, and it seems to survive without so much, carving or whatever. Just interesting to think about, like, how does that pair up with that real world experience of listening later, and what does it mean, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean, the nice thing about it is, it's art, and you don't have to solve every question there is in the universe to make art, isn't it? Sometimes that's our obstacles. We keep thinking we need to address everything.
Yeah, that's right. They can't all be home runs.
Yeah, but that's a cool concept. I really like that idea of, like, let's take these, because people do, it's like the artist or, the younger musician who's coming into the studio that brings like the latest, greatest, the new high-tech thing.
And if those high-tech things are like, like they're computer-based or they're sample-based, they're always going to give you stereo outputs. So how many records have you heard where it has 7 layers, and each of those layers was a stereo output, and they're all panned hard left, hard right? You know, that's what we don't want.
And then what is it?
Yeah, what is it? Right. So that's
like
what we don't
mono.
want. So give me the mono output, and let's focus on it and really see what's great about it and turn up what's great about it. It shouldn't have to be about making it stereo.
Yeah. What about just even the sounds themselves? I do find that in that digital world, you know, you're listening to the new processed guitar patch, or you're listening to the new synth, and each one wants to sort of be impressive on its own. So it's like this huge thing. Right. But it's hard to think, like, how do these even add up together?
If you got your 7 different instruments that the player has given you with his stereo out, and they're all optimized to have the 20 hertz to 20K, they're all optimized to have the fullest range possible, then you get brown by the time they've all added up. You haven't
get brown.
You know, instead of having a splash of orange and then a splash
stripe
of green.
of brown. You're wearing a sweater right now. It's got a stripe of yellow, a stripe of ochre.
Yeah, yeah.
It's ochre in the middle, isn't it?
It is. It is. Or maybe puce.
Puce. Love it. And I haven't said puce.
I don't think I've ever said
the last time you said puce, didn't you?
I don't even know what puce looks like.
But there's a brown stripe in there too. And
well, I try to look past
blue
that.
At the top.
Yeah, there's some
blue doesn't look
there.
good in navy.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Now, how about another thing related to making records? So as I listen to your records, you do a lot of complete records. You know, there's 10 plus songs on there. They're well thought out songs. They're well arranged. There's a full band, not too much, but just enough. And I think about the process of, and I know you as somebody who's efficient and, you know, get down to business. So I think about the process of making a record and how challenging it can be to go into one, being organized and, you know, kind of, you can't always predict what's going to happen every minute of every day, but hopefully you can predict enough that's going to take this long, and here's the beginning, middle, and end, and you get to the end and the record's done, you know, as opposed to somebody going, I think we need to double our budget. So can you talk a little bit about your process of working with an artist and organizing those parts so that you feel comfortable going into a record? Like, what are some lessons you've learned about that?
Well, first of all, I'm proud that my productions never go over budget. Maybe because I work fast and I have a pretty clear idea of what to do. Also, I try to do the right amount of prep. My prep is more about getting with the person that originated the song. Like in the case of a band, it would be the songwriter in the band. And I get with that person pretty early on and really talk about what the song means and what it's supposed to do and what the feeling of it's supposed to be and how long it's supposed to be and what the order of events is. And once that he or she is on the same page as I am about that, and I'm not saying they have to be on my page. We find something that works for all of us, you know. Once that's the case, then I like to get in the studio and lay it on the musicians pretty quickly so that I can get their early responses to our arrangement instead of them having over-rehearsed it with us at SIR for 5 days and then all the flavor and spontaneity is gone. So a lot of prep with the central creative dude, but then not very much prep at all with the players and the color people. And that's how I think it's a good combination of being conscientious, but also alive and spontaneous.
Just for clarity, Rockstars, Brad said the color people, meaning the people who are putting color overdubs on the record.
Yeah, not the colored people. Right,
just in case that went by quicker, you know, or the AI transcription didn't catch that.
That's right. Let's clarify.
Conjunction.
I don't want to get canceled.
No, the adjective.
Yeah, keep helping me on that.
Hey, rock stars. Yeah, you. I've got a secret to tell you. Want to know how I get a consistent sound mixing over 1,000 hours of recording studio rock stars? My secret is using iZotope, RX, Ozone, Neutron, Voice Enhancement Assistant, and Nectar to make sure every episode of this podcast sounds great. Right now, you are hearing RX Breath Control, D-Click, D-Clip, DS, Deplosive, Voice Denoise, Ozone Multiband Compression, Neutron EQ, VEA, and Limiting, all from iZotope. Use the secret code ROCK10 to get 10% off or pick up the new Trash Light along with many of the other free cool plugins over at iZotope.com.
Cool. So that also brings up a question. You mentioned, use the example of like over-rehearsing at SIR. And SIR Rockstars is a studio instrument rental company. It's a place with rehearsal spaces you can go to in Nashville with the band and then go hit the studio. What do you find about that? Do you sometimes rehearse in one place and record in the studio?
Here's how I do it these days. I like to get the whole band at the studio and I do a sound check. I get all the kind of general sounds, get the headphones figured out. It's like everyone's nodding at each other and smiling. Yep, I can hear everybody. Good headphone sound. Let's do take one. Like, whoa, we haven't really workshopped the song yet. Everyone take off your headphones and we're going to go out to the lounge where there's a couple of windows and the sun comes in.
Right.
And nobody's plugged in. It's an unplugged rehearsal where the drummer is on his knees.
Yeah.
And when I do rehearsals like that, everyone feels like, I can just try any jackass thing I want to. The recording light's not on. And I can hear what everyone else is doing because I don't have headphones on. I hear Tommy to my left slapping his knees, and I hear Richie to my right playing a little Casio, and I hear the singer right in front of me. And everyone's hearing each other in stereo the way you would at a campfire. And that's when people really start to listen to each other and you get the idea for what's important in the arrangement. And people are free to try things because the record button's not on.
Yeah. Once everyone's ears are getting worn out.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's some sunshine, there's a window. So I find that when I work like that, within about a half an hour, everybody is nodding and smiling at each other. And when I see everybody start to nod and smile at each other, that's the time to get right back out to where the microphones are. And usually we have a take within 2 or 3 takes.
And I think what's cool about that, too, is it gives everybody really a chance to hear where's the song starting from, right? It's like, what's the strum on the acoustic guitar and what's the singer doing? What's the phrasing?
That's right.
And all that, which is so crucial to performing a song. And so often I'm surprised when I'm like, are you, like, sometimes I wonder, it's like, are you not really listening to what the person's doing when they strum it? Because like that's the song. But then the flip side of that is, or do we all just have different ways of interpreting that song too?
Well, let me give you an example, something I can't do when I'm in the control room and everyone's on headphones. If I'm sitting there on one of the 5 folding chairs with these dudes out in the sunroom, and the very thing you said, it's like that guitar player is not really listening to what the bass player is doing. While they're doing the song, I just point at the guitar player, I get his attention, and then I point over at the bass player. I don't have to say a word. And he goes, oh, I see what it's all visual, Yeah. I can give visual cues, and they're kind of friendly that way. It's not like me getting on a talk back and you must,
Right.
It's just so much more casual and human like that.
It's like dancing about architecture, right? It kind of sucks to have to put a musical part into words sometimes to explain.
That's very true.
Although it can help. What about the bass? The bass is hard to hear when it's not plugged in.
Oh, well, I'll let the bass player have a little
miniature amp.
He can use a vibro champ or something.
Yeah.
Or he'll play the bass line on a baritone acoustic guitar and, just whatever it takes.
So
I'm not saying there can't be any electricity in that room. I'm just saying everything's at the same volume as the speaking voice.
Yeah.
It's all the volume that I set all those little practice amps at, so the singer doesn't have to sing loud. He didn't have a mic.
Yeah.
We're just sitting in a circle.
Yeah, that's a cool way to do it. And then when you go out and you get back in the headphones, it's like a fresh discovery of your new instrument that you get to play.
That's right.
On this thing. Where are the places where that ideal transition doesn't work? Like, do you find that the singer starts playing different when they're now on the electric and on the mic, or
maybe a little bit
like that?
Maybe a little bit. I mean, that might be a learning thing too. That might be a cool thing, Oh, there's one other thing about this sort of acoustic rehearsal with no headphones is I usually keep a whole bunch of instruments nearby, just sitting on stands, ready to go, so that if we do 3 passes on learning this song, it could be that on the second pass, I take away the guy's 12-string and say, don't play a 12-string. Here, try this baritone. And just throw a whole different instrument in his lap. And so by quickly throwing different instruments around the room, you get these unusual sort of unpremeditated combinations that usually makes people really light up. You really unlock it in an unexpected way. Just, you know what I mean?
I appreciate that idea of being rehearsed enough to hopefully be a solid musician as you approach this thing, knowing the song or feeling like you're familiar with what you're trying to do well enough, but then having the twist in there that makes you just look at it.
That's right.
Fresh. Now, what about the times when you're working with an artist that I feel like what you described is a situation where there's, you brought in professional musicians, maybe quality musicians that are able to pivot quickly. What about when you're working with an artist that has musicians they like to work with, or they want to bring in their drummer, that kind of stuff? How does that same situation apply or change?
Well, obviously it takes longer because they're not like session aces.
Yeah.
So it takes longer. And then it takes even longer still if the drummer has been playing the song with that singer-songwriter for the last year and a half.
Yep.
It's going to be so hard to get him to see the song a different way.
Yeah.
So it takes longer. And it takes a good attitude on everyone's part to be able to try it out. All I ask is that they try out my idea. If at the end of giving it a good fair shake, the artist and the drummer say, no, we want to stick with our live way, then I'm fine. I go with the live way. I'm working for them,
Yeah.
But it's trickier when a band knows a song from being on the road. They know it too well. And then,
yeah, because it's like it's already embedded.
Yeah,
it's already inked in.
I mean, they might have dialed in the perfect arrangement live, and then great, we're ready to go. But other times, it's like, that might be fine for live, but you got to realize that live, people are dancing and they're moving rhythmically. There's other things that don't work as well in recording, which is a blind medium and on earbuds and short attention span. At a gig, people paid the $20, so they're going to stick around to the end of the song. On Spotify, you're lucky if they stay around to the end of the verse.
Yeah.
So it's a whole different animal creating something for recording and release than it is preparing it for the gig.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the other thing that applies to the live situation is, like, a vocal can feel so great in a live situation because there's a human energy in the room that accompanies the vocal. And then when you listen to the recording later, you're like, wow, it's more out of tune than I remember.
And and also their facial expressions and all that stuff. It's like anytime that I get asked to come down and see a show, to check out a band, if I get there and that singer is super good looking, I have to close my eyes because I'll get seduced by their charisma. Not even good looking, if they're charismatic.
Right.
If they're charismatic, I have to close my eyes because none of that is going to apply to the recording I'm going to do the following month. So I have to listen to them with taking the charisma out. And it's hard to do, but I actually have to close my eyes,
Take the charisma out.
Well, it's for me to judge what really is the nuts and bolts of that particular tune, or what the chemistry of that band is,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can appreciate that too. As a guy seeing some girls singing where I thought they just had something really compelling about them, or just like alluring.
And then you realize it was just those blue eyes,
right?
Or something in the way she moved,
But closing your eyes and listening that way is great. And then, what are some other things related to that happen? Like, are there, I guess, intros can. That don't make sense in a recording, won't bother you in live necessarily, extended arrangements, things like that, right?
Exactly, yeah.
There's also a thing that happens sometimes on live where there's a messiness to the way the parts go together, and it can seem like it was working okay, but you hit the studio and it's like
it becomes
the
apparent.
bass and the kick aren't together.
Exactly. You find out things in the studio.
Yeah. So what about that? What does that mean to you that the drums and the bass are working together? I feel like a first lesson to learn is, what happens if the bass plays the same spots where the kick is playing, or vice versa? The drummer needs to pay attention to where maybe the bass notes make sense with the acoustic, with the guitar and vocal, and the drummer's just landing kicks anywhere they feel.
Both ways work. It just depends on the song. Some songs sound real stilted and unfun when the drummer and the bass player are locked into the same pattern. Right. Others sound great when they're locked into the same pattern. Who doesn't like Dreams by Fleetwood Mac? It just depends on the song.
Yeah.
Right.
And I like what you said about, just all I ask is that you try my ideas. So hopefully as a producer on a session, we bring a couple of things. One, hopefully we're the pair of ears that's just sitting around listening, since everybody else is busy playing, right?
That's right.
And then hopefully we recognize what we're hearing and what some possibilities are, so we can just say like, well, let's try this and that.
Mm-hmm.
And then what about your process of, if the band tries stuff, letting them feel empowered to decision make in the studio?
They can try anything they want. I mean, if they don't mind paying for the extra studio time, well, the record I just made with Chuck Prophet, he was paying for it. He paid for the studio time. We did like 25-minute takes of some of these songs because he was just out there looking for it. And kind of like Miles Davis would do, he's calling out audibles to the band, morphing the arrangement as it went along. And then he'd come in the control room and he'd go, man, right around minute 15 or minute 20, we hit on a really cool thing, Brad. Let's just forward the tape right to minute 15 and let's look at, and that was his process. So if you get the time and the budget to do it, let the band try whatever they want.
That's pretty good to have a sense of a minute and 15 when you're out there too.
He's guessing, but
Yeah, so you guys were doing a cool thing with Chuck. I think you were talking about doing a cumbia record.
Yeah, it's a mashup of like a rock record mashed up with a psychedelic cumbia record. And cumbia, people think of cumbia as sort of Mexican dance music, and boom, 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 go just all night long, people dancing all night long. But there was a movement of cumbia in South America in the 60s and 70s that was psychedelic cumbia, where they put like wah-wah pedals on farfisas and did all kinds of crazy, almost dub-sounding stuff. So Chuck got really into that kind of music, and he wanted to do a mashup. So he took half of his rock band, which is called the Mission Express. They're like the greatest rock band in America. And then he took this complete cumbia band from down the coast in Salinas called Quien Sabe, and we mashed them together, and we had 8 guys on the floor playing at the same time all week.
Oh man, that's fun! And
it was an inquiry, and it was a fishing trip, and it was exploratory. I'm trying to get up to speed. I'm still trying to get up to speed on it because I didn't really know much about cumbia, but it was so fun watching this new synthesis emerge from these 2 different camps, kind of getting together and playing together. It was really super exciting, but a lot for me to have to figure out.
I think my favorite part about tracking with a bigger ensemble is it gives you a chance to arrange and compose.
Oh yeah,
you get the whole picture so much quicker.
You do. We got the entire picture on the floor.
You can just
nothing's waiting for overdubs.
You could also just Jackson Pollock that thing in about 5 minutes, 5 seconds, and I mean, I'm using that as in a negative in this context, but the idea of like you can just splatter paint everywhere, That's right. Well, the whole time they were out there jamming, that's the beauty of a 25-minute jam. Since this is a 25-minute jam, no one's sacred about, oh my God, the mics are on. No one, like the photographer's like, can I go out and take pictures? I'm like, yeah, you can go out and take pictures. They're just looking for it. We might end up using minute 12 through 17 to be the album, but you can go out and click all the pictures you want because people are loose and they're creating. And so it gave me the chance to leave the control room, like at minute 12. I would leave the control room and I would go out into the booth where the 2 percussion guys were, and I would mimic with my hands a different pattern they could try. And they'd nod their heads. Track's still going. They nod their heads and they switch over to that different pattern. And then I just creep back to the control room. I don't have to use a talkback button. I can just say, I'm not above doing this. I'll go over to the guitar player. He's got his headphones on. They're at minute 17. I'm like, dude, take your headphone off. I'd make the international gesture for take off. I want to say something in your ear. So into his ear, I'll go, man, listen to what the second guitar player's doing. It's like he's playing the minor 6 there. Go with him on the minor 6. He puts his headphone back on, and next time that lap comes around, he starts going with the minor 6 with the other guitar player. So I'm able to inject synchronicity into that's what I'm always looking for. Yeah.
Always looking for if there's a guitar player with a specific sound, a whole different sound the keyboard guy's doing, and I love the keyboard guy's lick and I love the guitar player guy's lick, but they're fighting each other. I go over to the keyboard guy and I go, look, if you just change a few notes, your line will actually parallel with what the guitar player is doing. You're not unisoning it, you're not harmonizing it, but it's paralleling it. And suddenly you've got sonic synchronicity. And because I'm usually the guy that has to mix it, the more sonic synchronicity I can work into the arrangement, the easier the mix is. Everything just makes sense. And you don't have to do any kind of special EQ tricks to get people to share space. Just the music already was designed for them to sort of share the space.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And another place where pre-mixing is so effective is in that, what's the kick drum doing? What's the bass guitar doing? I think you were mentioning that for this one, you wanted to make sure the bass had plenty of room to breathe, just real natural.
It was by necessity because of cumbia music. Cumbia music has a super repetitive bass line. Pretty much, if you go to a dance club out in Nolensville Pike tonight and there's Mexican guys that have worked construction all day and they're out there with their best girl and they got their good shirt on, they're going to dance for 4 hours to this. boom, 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 and it's a trance, like a mantra, like reggae is. You know what I mean? But the bass player, the guy we worked with, he was a genuine West Coast Latino cumbia bass player. He was fantastic. And he made me see, when we did pre-production, that the cumbia bass line sounds deceptively simple. Boom, 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 boom. But really it's about which notes are long, which notes are short, which ones you mute out with your thumb, which ones sustain long, duration of the notes. And once he finds the perfect, almost scientific formula for that song's cumbia bass pattern, he keeps it almost like a loop. Like, it's uncanny how identical it is from bar to bar. But he's perfected each bar's durations and notes. And that's why I was telling you earlier, the studio engineer that we were working with, it drove him crazy that I wouldn't let him put his $25,000 Fairchild compressor that he uses for bass every time. I would not let him put any compressor on the bass. He didn't get, dude, you don't understand. If I compress it, the long notes, the durations will be off. It'll be sustainy the whole time.
Right.
And so it was fun to hear how great a bass could be with zero compression.
Yeah, I mean, the cool thing about getting the bass right is that, you know, you can, if you get it right, like, that's kind of what you hope the mix would sound like, you know, and then everything else just sort of falls into place too.
Exactly. And bass is a pleasure instrument too. There's certain instruments that aren't necessarily a pleasure instrument, but bass is supposed to be, it's supposed to give you ear pleasure, but body pleasure, lots of body pleasure. So if you can get that right, you're halfway there, because we're trying to make pleasure, you know?
And I feel like when I turn up music in the car, I'm responding to a couple of things. I'm deciding that I've hit as loud as I want to hear it from the mid-range. That tells me, like, I turned up the speakers loud enough, but the bass is like, needs to be loud enough coming out of the speakers so that I just feel it right.
That's a smart way to put it. I've never heard it put quite like that, but that's really hip. Set the volume to where the middle stuff sounds exactly right to you, and then judge the highs and the lows. Yeah. That's great, man.
Yeah, I don't know.
Taking that home with me.
I just spent so much time like worrying about, like, well, how am I screwing this up? You know?
Yeah.
So I think I got to break it down.
No matter what style of music you create, Native Instruments provides you all the instruments you need, from drums, loops, and beats to vintage and modern synthesizers, realistic strings, guitar amps, and futuristic synth pads. I really enjoy recording real bands in my studio, but then adding amazing overdubs from Contact, Massive X, Super 8, Battery, Guitar Rig, or Hybrid keys. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off, or get complete start for free today with a bundle of 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples at nativeinstruments.com.
You know, it's funny, you talked about, you know, the engineer wanting to use something in the studio, and I fully understand that. I mean, as engineers, I don't know if you ever felt that way, because you've always sort of come from a musician and producer place, adopting all the studio gear. Or maybe you do, like with your ideas of wanting to acoustify and you know,
Organify.
Which one?
Organify and acoustify, yeah.
Yeah, like
try to bring realness. And, you know, we live in a synthetic age. So, I mean, we're all looking for some human connection. Anyway, I digress. Keep going.
No, that's all right. But like, I remember doing sessions with you, and I was, you know, the young engineer, and God, I just like, Brad, come on, we got to do this crazy idea. I did sessions with you guys there where I was like, oh, let's take the voice feature out of the new, you know, the old Macintosh HESI, little white tower, and, you know, the bubble voice. And then I was feeding that over to the Ensoniq DP4 in its vocoder mode. And then we were running the guitar through the vocoder, and we were trying to create a bubble guitar. And it was like the stupidest sound ever.
Yeah, but you came up with a bunch of great creative sounds. I mean, that's the thing about creative sounds. You know, only 1 out of 3 really strikes gold. Right. But God bless you. I always thought it was awesome, your experiments you wanted to try.
It was fun.
A lot of them hit pay dirt in a big way.
I appreciated you guys letting me do all that stuff. Like, remember when we did Jill Sobule, Happy Town? I was secretly, I can't even say it. I can't, it's so emotional for me. I can't even say it. I was secretly recording Jill practicing drums in the other room to the DAT tape, and then importing those into your new, I think it was was it an EMU sampler? I think that's what it was. And then I was looping that off of the Macintosh back there. I brought it in and built drum loops, and then we turned that into Happy Town.
That's right.
That was the drum loop for Happy Town.
It worked great, man. It worked great.
Fun stuff. Okay, let's talk about completing a record, staying on budget. What are some of the obstacles to completing a record for a client when you're working with somebody? What are the obstacles?
The main obstacle for me, because I have a kind of an innate sense to how far along we are and where we should be here on day 7. So if you just let me kind of pace things, I'll get it done on time and on budget. The problem happens when the artist changes their mind about a song, midway, then, or wants to recut it or whatever, then you have to add extra days. But barring that, really, not much gets in the way of, for me anyway, of getting it done on time and on budget.
Yeah. Do you find that it's also a process of just that trust building with the artist, where they're just like, I'm just going to let Brad, work through his process?
I have to earn the trust. I don't expect them to go where I want them to go until I've demonstrated to them that some of my ideas are actually working, and then they get more open with them. But I have to prove it, every time. Yeah, I got to prove it.
Now, how do you even know how long it's going to take yourself to?
I don't know.
Do things.
I don't. It's really quite at this stage, since I've done this so long, it's quite uncanny. I always know, without having to spell it out or say it out loud, I always know exactly where we are on the project and how far along we are, and if we're on time or not. And something almost kind of unthinking in me steps it up a little bit if we're behind, or relaxes it a little bit if we're ahead. Just something instinctual just knows how to do it. I don't know how. It just works out like that.
Even when Liz just pops in and opens the door and interrupts your session to say hello unannounced.
Hey, baby, that's factored in.
Throw you off the
Our
rails.
studio doors are always open, so yeah, pop in anytime. And I'm also really good at kicking people out when I have to.
Yeah.
And the way I do it, let me tell your listeners out there the right and the wrong way to kick people out of the control room. The wrong way to kick people out of the control room is to glare at them a couple times, and then to go over and super politely say, "Hey, man, I don't want to harsh your buzz, man, but it would be really advantageous to me if you guys would maybe go out in the lounge just for a while." That's the wrong way to get. The right way to get people out is to stop the playback and go, "Out, everybody out." Just say it loud and almost kind of comic.
Right.
And don't make any excuses for it. And then people are like, "Oh, of course, yeah." And then but if you do this, I hate to, if you do that, then they get uptight because it sounds
right. It sounds like you're singling them.
Yeah,
out or
just stop the playback and go, "Everybody out." And people always giggle, and they're out the door 10 seconds later,
Yeah.
They don't. It doesn't hurt their feelings, is what I'm trying to say. It hurts their feelings when you go over and get in their face and try to quietly rationalize with them. That's when their feelings get hurt.
Right. It's like a false politeness.
Yeah.
And nobody buys that shit.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. Well, so keeping things on schedule, what about how you like to carve out time to do a record? Do you find, are there records where people are in for, 2 days of tracking or 3 days of tracking, and then it's wait a while and come back? Or do you find it's most powerful to do a record in these start to finish chunks?
Yeah, definitely start to finish is the way I like to do it. Unless it's a record that is a fishing trip, like the record that Chuck just did. If it's a fishing trip, that means that it's something new everyone's trying. We're not sure if it's going to work or not. And when it's, or the artist is sort of trying on a new hat that they don't usually wear. When I do a record where I'm asking the artist to try on a different hat for this album, then it makes sense to do it in 2 different waves. The first wave is just to get the first 7 songs on there and then give the singer 2 or 3 weeks to live with it and decide if he likes wearing that hat. And then you reconvene and you finish it out, or you just put on a whole new hat and start over.
Yeah.
I've done that before. But ideally, it's good that we all know going into it what this record's going to be about and do it all in one shot.
Yeah.
And I like to, even mixing, I don't really like to wait for more than a couple days before I start mixing, if possible, because I know where all the bodies are buried when it's fresh on my mind.
Yeah.
And I have all, if I know that I have to wait for 4 weeks to start the mixing, I do a lot more notes in my notebook to myself so that I'll remember where all the bodies are and the things I want to try.
Do you listen to the roughs during those 4 weeks a bunch of times and come up with new ideas?
That's the best way to get ideas for what you want to do next, is to listen to a rough with your eyes closed, with the lights off. And then even better, rather than have your computer right there where you have to turn the lights back on so you can type in your notes as the rough plays. It's even better just to have a little handheld, like a Zoom in your hand, and just lie on the couch with your eyes closed and just mutter into your Zoom while the rough
I think
goes
I got to
by.
get one. I've been debating that, and so I listen in the car a lot, and I'll be listening to a song, and then I'm like, oh, I need to take a note, but then I think, well, shit, my phone's busy playing the song. I can't take a note on it. So then I got a second phone for the car, and I was like,
Smart.
I'll take notes on that.
Exactly. iPhone messages are great. The iPhone is great for that stuff.
Yeah.
Just
but I
mutter
like
into
your
your
idea
iPhone.
of like the dedicated, voice transcriber.
You know what I like about the dedicated one is you can buy the dedicated one for $39 or $13 at the pawn shop, and you keep it in your glove compartment.
Do you get the old ones with cassettes still?
I've
or
got
is it
3
all
of
dig?
those. And
Like
I've got
the
a
little
Zoom and an
micro-cassettes.
Edirol, and I got my phone. I got a million little handheld things just peppered all around my life.
Right, but then they become the Crapsta mic. Remember that? And then you can't. And then you're like, it's on the drums. I can't use it for taking notes.
That's why I have 2.
Tell us about the
Crapsters now.
Crapsta again, because that never gets old. Rockstars need to hear
I think
about it.
you titled it the Crapsta.
I think we might have.
The Crapster. It just was a Radio Shack handheld micro cassette recorder that people used to take to, like, students would take it to college lectures, and so that's what it was really designed, or business meetings. That's what it's designed for. But like a lot of those little devices, it has a wonderfully compressed little 69-cent microphone built into it. And so you and me started using them a lot when we were recording drums. And, you have your clear, nice, high-tech drums mic'd close, but then you've got the Crapster that's somewhere like in the crotch of the drum set or 10 feet in front, wherever. And it's just distorted and compressed all to hell. And then you know how it is. It's parallel compression. Once you put a little bit of that in the mix, suddenly the drums just perk up. It's a great thing.
Yeah, and so we would modify a cable that would come out of the headphone jack, and you just put it into record pause.
That's right.
And then the input mic would sort of directly send a signal out through a DI and record that onto its own track.
I still do it sometimes.
on
I'm
the
still
trusty
using
old
the Eli
ADAT
Shaw
machine.
Crapsta method. I'm still using it.
Yeah, the first one we used it on was we were recording Hans in the band Shazam. He was doing a rockin' acoustic part, and I think we set up like a 57 with a Crapsta mic right next to it, and then combined it. And it was like it made the acoustic sound like an electric guitar.
It's great on acoustic. It's a great thing on acoustic. I love it. Also, for the listeners, don't discount the beauty of the iPhone microphone.
Right.
I've gotten really good vocals on an iPhone, and it's not that it's hi-fi, but it is very real. Like maybe if you are at the right distance from the person, and it's not like they're talking in their phone, but more like you're at a distance and you're using the iMessage app, right?
Yeah.
It's just
Voice memo.
Voice memo, right.
Yeah.
Voice memo. I know what the icon looks like. I can't remember what it's called. Voice memo, right? Even though the singer is like 2.5 feet from your phone while you do that, it's very real. You put that in the mix and you actually see that singer 2.5 feet in front of you. They're there. You know them. You see them. It's really useful for that. And the EQ curve on it is not bad.
Yeah.
It's surprisingly
good. It has
good.
a surprising amount of low end to it if you wanted to, but it's not like too much nasty high end.
So if I want a super realistic vocal where you're right there, right in front of the singer, I'm more inclined to do that than to put the singer 8 inches from a compressed condenser mic with a pop screen on it, which is it's almost like hyper reality, really. It's not true reality, even though they do the EQ tests on that Neumann at 10 inches. Okay, the EQ test and analysis tells us that is a super accurate mic, but it doesn't mean that it sounds more real to the listener than that iMessage recording that's from 2 feet away.
Yeah, the fun thing about recording quickly on a voice memo is then you just airdrop it over to the studio computer and drag it right into your session. Although I think I can't remember, it's a funny file format, but I think it still drags into a Pro Tools
session.
Sure
it does. You just export it as a WAV file. Drag it right in.
Right.
It's easy. I do it all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
I tried some experiments recently where I remembered Chuck Hatcher over at Alex the Great, and he would take the micro cassette and he'd sort of play back a vocal, and then he'd point that around the speaker and made me move it about and stuff like that.
Ooh.
And then we put that back in on its own track, so it was
Phasey.
like this tape version, and it was phasey.
Oh,
and,
that's cool,
and I
man.
tried
How
it with
come you
the
didn't tell me
iPhone.
about that earlier? I got to try that tonight.
I forgot about it.
I'm trying that.
But
That's
I tried
great.
the same thing with an iPhone, and then I just imported the iPhone ones, and you can kind of line them up or delay them and create a whole new thing. And it was very cool sounding. It was like instant compression, you know.
Were you ever around did we ever do sessions together where we wanted the electric guitar to feedback, but the guitar player was in the control room with us? So I'd take one of the NS10s in my hands and walk over to the guitar player and stick the NS10 kind of like
right up against the guitar.
And we were getting feedback that way.
Oh, that's cool. I bet you could set up an additional mono speaker. Like if you don't want to take yours off the stands or something, you could just have another one in the control room and just like.
But that is what feedback is at a gig. It is the sound waves coming out of an amp that are reanimating the guitar strings.
I wonder if you could build something like a physical one, like you know how they have those thumper things you can stick under a stool and it puts bass in the stool for a bass player, which to me sounds like such a cool idea, and I haven't done it in the studio, but I'd like to get one. You could probably find like a reverse contact mic, you know, as a speaker. And,
that'd be great.
Just like hold it up against the electric
also,
guitar.
it would be, now that I'm thinking of it, now that we're thinking of it, now that we're inventing our next app that you and I are going to develop, or whatever, our next gadget, a speaker that you hold and you can hold it up to the guitar to get feedback, but you have a pretty dedicated high pass and low pass on it. Yeah. Because really when you get guitar feedback, you're not looking for squeals. That's the wrong kind of feedback. Right. And you're not looking for 60 cycle you want those mids. Right. So you could sculpt your speaker that you're holding up the guitar to just have only everything between 300 and 2K, nothing else. And that would give you the really useful feedback, the feedback that you can use musically.
Yeah, it's like maybe not the fundamental, it's like the first overtones. You
still hear the fundamental, but really feedback is about overtones. Yeah. You want the fifth to ring out, a high, even a third. You can even get the major third to ring out with feedback. Those are the main ones that come out.
Yeah, I feel like some of the feedback records you did were those Shazam records. I think I remember there's some good ones.
Feedback's exciting because it's like if you end a song and the drums are dying out and you hear the guitar start to kind of act like it sounds like it might just be about to run away from you, that's exciting. When people hear that, they sense not only did the song end, but I can see these guys on stage like reaching for their beer as that little squeal happens at the end. It's like putting people in the moment, making it visual.
And those bands that we came up with too, you know, through the 80s and stuff like that, it was just like, it was such a great move for some guitar player to just set their guitar on a stand. They just walk off stage and it's just squealing away. And you're standing there in the audience thinking like, that's the greatest thing.
You know, what they were actually doing is begging you for an encore.
Exactly.
They're letting you know, the door's still open to an encore, people. If you clap hard enough, we will come back.
So we just need that on our records, you know, play again feedback at the end of the album.
Yeah.
What's some of the stuff that's coming up in the future of music and recording that you do get excited about? So, for example, you've described some of the ways in which you can, you know, kind of like filter out too many distractions and have a simple, not simple, but like a not too overwhelming collection of options for recording and for making music. But then new things are coming. So is there anything that sort of catches your attention that you get excited about? Or has it already been invented?
Most of the stuff's been invented from a musician's point of view. And I always approach things as a musician. So as a musician, most of the foo groups are there in place. There's gadgetry that the tech guys are going to always ooh and ah about, and it gives Sound on Sound magazine something to write about, and it keeps their advertisers coming in. But, you know, I don't spend much time reading those magazines now because it's like, God, do we really need a 7th iteration of the 1176? I mean, they already figured it out, you know? Right. And of course, there's the world of Atmos, which we could get into, but I prefer we didn't. I'd rather talk about other stuff than Atmos.
I've got people who want to talk about that.
Yeah, talk to those guys about it. You don't want to talk to me about it. I won't have much to add.
I prefer talking to you about working in mono as much as possible. To me, that's exciting.
Yeah, and music. And I always want to kind of make everything as it applies to music. Yeah. You know, not as it applies to ones and zeros, but as it applies to music. That's my whole thing.
Yeah, there's a thing like, you know, when you are in the studio, there's just so much to listen to. Working in mono and learning how to listen for what part could fit is exciting. You know, doing things in stereo and loud. And I remember the many times where I was like, where I would get fixated on mysterious sounds that are coming through the mic. What is it? What's that little, do you hear that part in there and stuff like that? And I think sometimes those were distracting for me in the studio, probably because I was in stereo and it was too loud.
Yeah,
and all
put
that
it in
kind of
mono
stuff,
and turn it down low. Yeah. And then you really hear the skeleton of the music and what's important and what isn't.
Yeah. So we'll bring this up one more time. The way that Alex the Great was set up, I think you still have it this way. You've sort of got the center position with the console and then your two stereo speakers to work and record. But then over to the right, you would have a Pro Tools setup, and then you would often set up like a pair of really small speakers.
Yeah, just consumer bookshelf speakers.
And I remember at the time I was like, "Come on, Brad, what's this all about?"
I mix and edit on those smaller speakers because, like mono, it kind of keeps me honest, and it also tells me what the skeleton of the thing is rather than what the tiny little details of it are.
Yeah.
So it keeps me focused on what's important.
Yeah.
So I do a lot of editing and mixing in those small speakers.
Took me a couple of decades to finally get there, but I really appreciate that now.
Good.
I have my little Auratone speaker or a Vontone set up so that I can just do as much as possible there.
Oh, man. And to be able to go back and forth, you learn a lot. Every time you switch to the big speakers and back to the smalls, you learn something every time you switch.
Yeah. You learn stop switching?
Both ways. Yeah, right.
Atom Audio is celebrating 25 years of researching, developing, and manufacturing industry-leading monitoring solutions in Berlin. To mark this milestone, our friends at Atom Audio are unveiling a special limited edition series of monitors that will look stunning in your studio and sound as awesome as your music. Introducing the Arctic White A4V and A7V series. Available for a limited time to pro and home studio owners like yourself, the clean, glossy white finish exudes a luxurious feel and will stand out in any studio or home audio system. Featuring the XART accelerated ribbon tweeter design and customizable speaker voicings, the Arctic White A4V and A7V retain the full specifications of the original design. Plus, with SonarWorks integration for automated room correction, you can fine-tune your monitors to your control room's acoustics. Atom Audio's commitment to delivering professional-grade, high-fidelity sound to studios worldwide has made these monitors a perfect fit for Grammy-winning producers in both pro and home studios for a quarter of a century. Now you can bring that beautiful high-fidelity sound to your own productions and make your studio look as cool as your music sounds. Don't miss out on the limited edition Arctic White A4V and A7V monitors, available for a short time with the standard extended 5-year warranty at atomaudio.com. I am really impressed with iZotope Ozone. I've been mastering many of my records recently, and Ozone makes it so easy to get a fantastic sound. The built-in mastering assistant helps by analyzing the mix and suggesting all the settings needed for a professionally mastered result based on the genre and EQ curve of your choice. You can even reference a specific song if you want, using simple yet sophisticated modules like Clarity, Impact, Low-End Focus, Stabilizer, Imager, Exciter, and Spectral Shaping, along with powerful dynamic EQ, compression, and limiting. You just adjust the settings to your taste and it sounds incredible. And the magic of mastery balance means you can manipulate the level of the vocal, bass, and drums even at the mastering stage. Amazing. My bandmates are pretty demanding, but now when I send off the masters for approval, they absolutely love the way our records sound thanks to iZotope. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off Ozone or other tools like RX and Voice Enhancement Assistant, or grab any of the cool free plugins like the new Trash Lite at iZotope.com. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session, aka the second half of the show. My guest today is Brad Jones, joining us here in Podzilla. No, what was it? Pod Damn It?
Pod Damn It. Love that.
Let us know in the comments, Rockstars, what I should name the podcasting studio up here. If my main studio down there for music is the Toy Box Studio, but this one is dedicated to podcasting, at least for now. You ready to jam?
Let's jam.
Whatever that means.
Let's do it.
All right. So one of the things I wanted to ask you about was the process of changing things. We talked a bit about the, how you keep some of the stuff the same. Don't create distractions for yourself so you can focus on the music. But what about, and on the last episode, actually, you talked about the process of starting out where you were trying to get the artist onto your page, and then you learned to sort of get yourself onto the artist page to make a record. But what are some ways that you think of today in which your style of production has changed through your career?
I've been through different phases. Like when you and I were creating the Crapster and
the great years, the greatest years,
great years, yeah,
the golden years,
peak era, right?
Peak era.
When we were holding up guitar, NS10s to electric guitars to get them to feedback and all that jackass stuff we were doing, and we were putting a lot of sounds on tape and a lot of layers, and we were greedy for layers and sounds and all that stuff. Now, in my aged years, I'm not as greedy for tricky sounds. What I'm greedy for right now is pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
The yardstick I bring to everything now is pleasure. It's like, okay, let me give you an example. It's like I heard someone describe, this has got to be about 5 or 6 years ago. Conway West dropped a record that had these some crazy sounds, like super innovative. And I remember talking to someone and I go, they said, man, have you heard the new Kanye record? I was like, I haven't heard it yet. Tell it me, because it's incredible. It's amazing. I was like, okay, interesting. I said, do you like it? And the guy says, well, I think I do. And I was like, did you listen to it a second time? And he goes, no. And that really told me something. It's like when someone comes up to me and I said, what was that new record? Like, cool, man. It's a cool record. To me, that says it's a record that has interesting sounds, but it didn't move them. If I say, what's that record like? Tell me about it. They go, it's wonderful. It's a wonderful record. That's different. If a record is cool, that just means that it's innovative or has jaw-dropping sounds or it doesn't mean that it gives you any pleasure. If a record is wonderful, if it makes you think that's a wonderful record, that means that it meant something to you and you're going to listen to it a second and third time.
Yeah.
So there's probably countless people in our field that say things the same. That Kanye record, amazing, but they don't listen to it at home. You know what I listen to when I go home? I'll listen to like Bach, or I'll listen to like a Big Joe Turner record from 1954. You know why I listen to the Big Joe Turner record? Because that record was designed for pleasure, only for pleasure. It's a shuffle beat. It has a big, rich voice on a ribbon mic. The lyrics are fun, and they're not trying to like promote any kind of advanced theory. It's pure pleasure. So that's really the yardstick I bring now to records I'm involved with. It's like if the singer or the writer gives me their demo, I listen to the demo, I say, okay, cool song. I think this could make the record. Which part of this 3 minutes that they just gave me gives me the most pleasure? You know what? I think it's the bridge. Something in the bridge, my body just gets happy. I just get pleasure out of hearing the bridge. Why are we only doing it once? Let's maximize the pleasure. Let's do it. Let's do the bridge 3 times and call it a chorus. I want to enjoy as much pleasure as I can and bring as much pleasure as I can into the world.
Yeah.
Because life is short. So that's how I've changed in a big way.
Now, do you find that some of those moments of identifying the pleasure, you don't even know about it until the band is start to lay down some of the recording? And
sometimes.
And you're like, wow, the way that adds up.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had sections of songs that I've done with my band where on playback, it's like I would have had no clue it was going to sound like that before we hit the studio. But
exactly,
and it's tricky. It's tricky. So I'm putting myself out in the musician's chair a lot more these days, which makes me happy, real happy.
Me too.
But it is tricky. I'm really learning to appreciate the value of having trusted ears in the control room. I've learned to self-appreciate where I'm like, holy shit, I didn't realize how much I was bringing to a session, self-bragging, but, for any of us, same thing, how much I was bringing to a session as the engineer, as the producer, that I can't do right now if I'm out in the musician's chair. Mm-hmm. I just sort of have to like let go of that and, focus on the music and then go in and sort of like discover what it is. What about for you? How you've been playing both roles for a while. What's some stuff you've learned about balancing your musician's perspective against your producer's perspective? And how do you get the most out of both?
I will say that if I go out on the floor and play with everybody at the same time, if I go out there and get on keyboards or especially on bass, I can kind of subtly influence or steer the arrangement without having to open my big fat mouth. I can just do it by what I'm playing, especially with bass. That's probably why guys like Brian Wilson and Paul McCartney probably liked playing bass. Without having to say anything, you could, just by shifting your pattern, you could make the drummer shift.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I do find that kind of useful because I'm tired of the sound of my own voice. And I imagine people I work with get tired of the sound of my voice too. So if you can demonstrate it instead of articulate it, that's a great thing.
What about the sounds of the recordings? Like you're out there playing bass now and the drummer changes it up. And if you're not in the control room, how do you know that the mics are adding up
Well,
the way you would love?
I try to not do more than 2 or 3 takes on the floor, and then we all go listen.
Right.
There's a lot of times, or like, the thing about looking at, when I look at the band after the second take and go, I know that wasn't the take, but let's just go listen to it. What I'm really doing is I'm saying, there's a million things I could point out of what you 4 motherfuckers did wrong. But wouldn't it be much better if we just went in the control room and I played the playback and gave you a very clear, unreverberated mix, and you'll all see without me having to say anything, what you would do differently. It's anything we can do without me having to say it is great.
Yeah.
So that's what the playbacks are for. And then, so if the drummer does change his tone, after 2 takes, we'll find out. And we'll go back out and we'll address that.
I've found the same thing, both whether I'm out on the floor or in the control room, is like, it's so much more effective rather than trying to verbalize how they're not hitting the toms right or something like that.
Yeah, just show them.
Sorry to pick on the drummers. It's always you at the beginning because we're just trying to get that foundation onto the song.
I know.
But the, articulating that, just bring the drummer in, and like musicians, they don't always hear it right off the bat, but a lot of times they just hear it as soon as you hit play, they just get it, and they go out there and play different.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. So one of the artists that you've been working with recently is a young, very talented, well, I think he's young. He look young to me at my, 56 going on 57
Yeah,
now.
Ben Goldsmith?
Ben Goldsmith.
He just turned 18.
Golden voice, too.
Yeah, he just turned 18. I started working with him when he was 13 and a half.
Is it too late to change his name to Gold Voice?
Good idea. Yeah.
So he's an 18-year-old, and tell us a little bit about working with him. What's he's sort of a prodigy and playing a lot of instruments himself, or what?
It was a great process, and I loved it. I loved it because he and I became very close because we kind of, I was his sounding board, and I showed him a lot about how records get put together, and I showed him what to think about and what not to think about, and then he showed me a lot of cool licks and chords because he's kind of a prodigy, an instrumental prodigy. But when I took on the project, he was 13, and his manager called me and said, there's this kid. The manager said, I actually retired from managing, but when I heard this kid, I came out of retirement. I want to manage this kid. He's in New York. He's 13. He's won every guitar contest that Gibson or Fender has put him in since he was 7.
Wow.
He has studied advanced jazz theory at the Manhattan School of Music from age like 10 to 12. He's writing. He's written already about 30 or 40 songs. He not only plays guitar, but he's a great keyboard player and he's a good drummer. And so let's bring him to Nashville, right? See what this kid can do. And my response was, that's all fine and good, but I've heard these demos. These demos are cool. These are all made in his bedroom, but I want to go to his bedroom in New York and sit with him for a weekend and see how he's doing it. So that was my first move, was rather to bring him to Nashville where he's going to be like a deer in headlights and blinded by this big studio and this. I want to go to his environment where he's comfortable and just watch him for a weekend and learn where he's coming from as a 13-year-old. So that's how it started. I went and spent the whole weekend with him in his bedroom in New York with his parents bringing snacks up, And he just showed me how he did Logic and what his ideas was and how he does stuff. And
he's in Logic, yeah.
Yeah.
It's such a great tool for composers.
It's been great, yeah.
For artists, I think.
And so anyway, that's how we started it. And then we thought the coast is clear to bring him to Nashville a few months later. But, a greedier manager or label or producer would be like, yeah, we'll work out the deal right now. It's a developmental deal. And we'll get the best players in Nashville and we're going to get this record made by the end of the spring. And so Ben's 14 and he's sitting on his first album. That's how greedy guys would do it. The greedy manager, the greedy label, the greedy producer would do it like that.
Right.
Well, we looked at it differently. It's like, Christ, the kid's voice hasn't even changed yet. We don't really know what kind of singer he's going to sound like when he's 15 and his voice has finally changed. He's got his grown-up voice. And then further, my point to the manager was not only that we shouldn't be in a hurry, not only for that, but also think about how many people made their debut album at a tender age. And then once they got to be 23, they're like, God, I wish I hadn't done that. That's not at all where I'm at. That's just kind of something that someone told me to do or I thought I should do.
Right.
That wasn't me. So it was very on purpose that we did not hurry this process. We're like, it's going to take as long as it takes for us to allow Ben to make multiple trips to Nashville for him to try on different hats. Like one trip he made to Nashville, I just put him together with sort of real dusty, seat-of-the-pants songwriters like Bobby Bear Jr. and people that did real kind of organic, fun songwriting, see where that led him. And then we would do demos of those songs to see if that was the right kind of hat to wear. Other times he would come to Nashville and we put him together with songwriters that were more commercial or more kind of like modern, universal sounding themes, nothing too specific. Put him with those kind of songwriters or even piano ballads. And okay, now the second trip to Nashville, we're going to do a more thoughtful side, piano ballads. Third trip to Nashville, have him co-write a song with Sadler Vaden and come in the studio and just rock out and just try that for a few weeks. So we let Ben try on pretty much every hat we could think of. And it wasn't until he was about 16, multiple trips to Nashville, that we kind of settled on the thing that he really was. And he agreed too, and his voice had changed by that point, which was glorious because we found out that his grown-up voice after puberty change was a badass rock, blue-eyed soul voice.
Right on.
Like, it's great. And so we were high-fiving all around. So finally, he knew who he was and what he was about. Then was the time to show it to labels. And not surprisingly, he got snatched up by a label like that.
Wow.
So he signed to Sony Nashville, when he was 16. And then the record came out when he was 17. And just a couple weeks ago, he turned 18. But the record's interesting because it's a real document of
That's
a teenager.
The one that we've got in the playlist, yeah.
Yeah. The record is, it's a long record. It has like 16 songs on it or something, 15 songs. And the lion's share of those songs were sung when Ben was 15. There's a couple songs that were sung when he was 16, and there's a couple that were sung when he was 14, but most of it when he was 15. So you really get this time capsule of a guy at age 15 giving it his all and sounding great. It's really exciting to me.
And that's The World Between My Ears.
Yeah.
Great picture of him just sort of sitting there with this Chuck Taylor.
That album cover is on purpose because, of course, Sony had the high-dollar art department. And they're like, we can do this and we can do that. And Ben and his manager was like, yeah, that's all fine and good, but can't we just have a Polaroid of Ben with his Converse on the front with his own writing on? They didn't want all the fancy fonts and they wanted it to be reflective of what the album, which is a pretty genuine document of where a 15-year-old kid was at.
Yeah.
At that time in his life, not influenced by a bunch of oldsters. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, so that's a cool process. And now that sounds, to hear you describe it is cool too, because that also sounds quite different from what you described a minute ago, where you're like, 7 days, you're right on time, right on budget, you know exactly how to get from start to finish.
Yeah, this was the opposite.
But this is a different way to do it. And, at the risk of asking for details that we don't need to get into necessarily, but the, just the budget management of working in, an unpredictable fashion. What are some good tips there? So, for example, if we want to give an artist a chance to explore and experiment, and we want to participate and produce and help, and maybe have hopefully a long-term vision for it, do we, does it make sense to just sort of say like, hey, let's go into the studio for 3 days. We just need a budget for 3 days. See what we do.
That's how we did this. I just told Ben and his manager, it's like, I'm not going to make any producer fee, zero fee. If you get a record deal down the road, you can pay me a fee, in retro. But while we're making this, just buy the studio time as we go. And Ben was able to mobilize the dough to just sort of buy a week here, buy a week there.
Yeah.
At a pretty discounted rate.
Right.
And then a lot of it was off the clock. Ben and I spent a lot of time in my kitchen just working through song ideas. And he and I co-wrote some too. It was fun to write with him.
Just
really
show
fun.
any of your the Bach pieces you learned?
I made him put lyrics to Bach. No, anyway, he was a joy to work with because he's just so creative and fast and energetic.
Well, I heard him singing the other day and just heard his voice on the mic and I was like, wow, that guy can sing.
He's a great singer.
Then he walked out and was like, hey, we met the last time I was here.
Yeah, he's great.
Well, that's cool. So then, it's funny thinking of another young voice on a microphone. Somebody that you worked with back when we were working together was Steve Forbert, who did the Rocking Horse Head song. And he had, of course, done Romeo's tune.
Yeah.
So I went and listened to that again.
That's a great record.
He sounds about Ben's age.
Yeah, he always had kind of
an
elfin, kind of hoarse, youngish voice, yeah. And never would sing sophisticated, always sang with kind of a wide-eyed innocence. He still sounds like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's great. Distinctive voice. It's him right away.
Yeah, so Rocking Horse Head was one that we did together back then.
That's right.
I don't remember if you had, if there was other stuff that you guys
That's the only record I did
That was the
with
only
Steve.
one, okay, good. Anyway, he was a nice guy. I remember him coming around the studio.
Oh, yeah, he's total kook too. Beautiful, beautiful guy, beautiful character. Yeah.
Let's see. So some of the other records, Helen Shanahan is one in your playlist. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I actually I'm a known quantity in Australia, of all places. And I don't know how this happened, but I can't get arrested in Italy, but I can get arrested in Australia. I don't know what it is, but I've worked with probably 10 different Australian artists, a couple of which are pretty commercial. One of them went gold. It's the only gold record I've had. Of course, in Australia, you only need to sell about 10,000 copies, and that's certified gold.
Right on.
Small population, right? But anyway, this Helen Shanahan record, I think it's the most recent Aussie that I did, and she's the one that touched my heart the most of all. She's the one that seemed the most genuine and singing from her heart, and a beautiful voice and beautiful writer. And of course, she can't get arrested right now because she's doing music that's kind and empathetic, and it's not snazzy. But there's just and making a recent record was kind of a joy for her and me. We made it during the pandemic, so she didn't want to make the trip on the airlines, but she had all these songs she'd written that really meant a lot to her. She was a new mother. She had just had her first child. A lot of emotional endorphins coursing through her bloodstream and spilling onto the page. And so what we worked out is she was just going to go in the studio in Melbourne and acoustic guitar and voice, just sing those 12 songs to a click track and send it to me. And it was up to me by myself in Nashville to surround that voice and guitar with strings and drums and whatever,
Oh, cool.
And I got to just create the whole sound around it, which was a great pleasure for me. I got to work at my own speed. I got to try any jackass idea that I had. And fortunately, it worked. She liked what I did, and I liked what she did. And so we got a beautiful record out of it. And I'm just very high on that record. It's called Canvas.
Yes, Canvas. And that's in the playlist also, Rockstar. So please check that out. Listening to your records, I'm always struck by how well you use string arrangements on albums. Back all the way back to when I was there to all the stuff that's current. What are some of the methods that you employ now to add strings to records? I mean, Chris Carmichael was somebody we used to work with.
Still do,
right?
Yep.
And of course, you have such a great collection of musicians right here in Nashville. If you need horns,
the guys
strings,
in Nashville, Austin Hoke and Avery Bright. Austin is a genius. He's just a musical genius.
That's
Jim Hoke's son.
Jim's son, right?
And he's
cellist.
Cellist.
Yeah.
He won the state of Tennessee when he was a senior in high school. He was the best cellist.
Wow.
In Tennessee, he's like that kind of guy. But he's more than cello. He's a great Moog player. I mean, he's a great arranger. He does everything. But anyway, I'll do sessions when I've already written the string part. I'll just bring in him and his pal Avery. Avery plays violin and viola. And I can get those two guys just to stack for an afternoon, and we can get a complete string arrangement.
So do you, what are the lessons you've learned about having the right arrangement on a song? I know you're quick with your ear. You can say, hit the seventh, hit the blue third.
Yeah.
And I used to sit there in the control room going,
what's he talking
hey, Brad,
about?
what's that? What did you just say?
Yeah. Well, there's a million things to say about it. That's probably a whole different podcast. So cut me off if I go on too long. okay? But when I'm setting down to ponder strings on a song, the first thing I ask myself is, do we want quartet writing or Hollywood section writing? They're two completely different animals. Quartet writing means there's one instrument per part. You could have a trio or you could have a string quartet. One cello, one viola, one violin. And that has a very kind of chamber music, organic, crunchy, near sound.
Anything that comes to mind for you immediately for like a record that
Yesterday by the Beatles.
Yesterday by the Beatles. Okay, great.
Okay. Now, section writing is different. Section writing would be like Lee Hazelwood's record, Some Velvet Morning. Section writing means the producer in L.A. or in Hollywood in 1963 said, man, I got this string line. It goes like this. You guys just play that. And so there's 7 violins playing that up and then down 1 octave are 5 violas playing the exact same line. And then way down in the basement is a couple cellos also playing that line. That's classic section writing, where everyone's like triple tracked to the bejesus, and it's more about that single moving line.
Right.
And that is a more cinematic effect. Mm-hmm. If you want your record to have a cinematic, like I did a record, I don't think, there might be one track on my playlist that you got for this podcast, but there's a band from Finland that I've been working with, and they're called Lone Deer Laredo. And that's all section writing. All the strings on that are Hollywood, because we wanted a cinematic vibe on that record. We weren't looking for intimacy. We were looking for grandeur and horizon. So if you want grandeur and horizon, just come up with a really excellent line that you can sing. It never hurts to get your string arrangements by singing into a microphone.
Is that Lone Deer Laredo Volume 2?
I don't know.
That's the one that just clicked up.
I've done 3 records. No. Yeah, I've done 3 records.
Let me see. I'll try and add it.
Third record's not out yet.
I think Noon, Fever, somewhere
that's
down.
the stuff.
Okay.
That's a good example of writing strings for a more cinematic vibe. But Yesterday works, and here's a cool lesson about the Beatles. Paul said to George Martin, because here they are just mop tops playing like beat music. And on the second record, Paul's like, hey, producer, I want to have strings on this song of mine. And George Martin is, oh, excellent. We'll bring in the orchestra. Paul's like, whoa, no. I don't want an orchestra. That's corny. That's like mom listening to Montevani records. Right. I want just a little string trio. You know, like we hear at the art school in the tiny little room off to the side of where the painting students are. I get it. We'll just write for a quartet.
Yeah.
And that was Paul's way of making it not be Hollywood. He wanted the opposite of Hollywood. He wanted intimate, kind of intellectual drawing room. And that's what you get when you write for a trio or for a quartet.
It's more intimate. It's closer.
And also it's about making chords. Yeah. A lot of quartet writing is, I'm not going to try to do a striking line. I'm just going to make beautiful chords that sort of show nicely. But if you try to make big, beautiful chords with Hollywood writing, you just get this mush. So you have to write a little more graphically. Your writing is a little more to purpose when you're writing for the big section writing.
All right, those are great tips. So then the next questions are, how does that change the nature of how you visualize the space in this recording that you're doing, and how the strings coexist with other instruments, and then also where do you begin to come up with these chord structures and line ideas? And everything?
First question, once again going back to that Paul McCartney song, Yesterday. I call it a Paul McCartney song because the other 3 lads didn't help. It was just Paul and a string quartet. But since it was a string quartet, it could be dry and close. So on the soundstage, which is your first question, you can put a trio or a quartet really close and dry. If you have section writing, you almost have to make them wet and behind the singer. Right. That's the nature of it.
Okay.
You make them wet and far back in the soundstage. That's their purpose.
Which is why it works for Mom's Records with Tom Jones.
Exactly.
Just this big figure in the center.
Exactly.
What do songwriters, music producers, DJs, EDM artists, TV and film composers all have in common with you and me? We all need amazing sounds that instantly elevate our music to the desired style. That's why Native Instruments is your ultimate toolkit, offering a massive library of sounds for your studio. Whether you're into hip-hop, indie pop, classic rock, meditation music, dance beats, or orchestral arrangements, the Native Instruments Complete Bundle has it all. From drums, loops, and beats to synths, realistic strings, vintage bass, guitars, and keys, it's a comprehensive collection. I love recording real bands in my studio, but then enhancing the tracks with drum samples, synths, and futuristic keys from battery, contact, Massive X, guitar rig, and hybrid keys, for example. It's a surefire way to make your productions sound modern and unique. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off or get Complete Start for free today, featuring 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples at nativeinstruments.com.
Okay, cool. And then what about the and so like the big section works with the big, bombastic drum sound too, potentially.
Yeah.
And that kind of stuff,
Right.
a way to think about it.
Yeah.
It's almost like visualizing all this stuff on a big stage, and that becomes your sound. Now, what about the arranging of them? Like, do you like to have some chord ideas first? Do you find it's useful to put ideas down with a MIDI thing and then show them?
I think the most useful thing that anybody can ever do is pull out their little handheld device, their iMessage, whatever, put on the rough and sing along in your girly falsetto voice. Sing along with the rough with your eyes closed and not thinking. That's the best way to find what I call the top line, the lead line, the violins, violin one. Once you find that, you always find it better with your voice than you do with your fingers on MIDI. Your fingers have their own patterns that they follow, but the voice is the most genuine one. Even if you aren't a good singer, if you're a producer engineer and you got a lousy voice, still try to sing what you think the top violin line would be.
Yeah.
Once you find that top line and you know it's working with the song, then you can get it into MIDI and you can drop it on there and you can start looking around for ways for the viola to harmonize it, or look around for ways for the cello to actually do something that works with the electric bass player and doesn't fight the electric bass player. But the first step is always to find that main violin line and do it with your voice.
I think that's brilliant. I've discovered that myself in the studio, that you should always have something in your hand when you're listening back, because if you can, because you're gonna go like, oh, I hear a, and then it's like it comes and goes so quickly.
Also, let me take it a step further. It's kind of tied into that. Here I am, the producer guy. I'm going to be the string arranger. I'm singing, but even more, like in the case of Ben Goldsmith, for instance, there was a tune where we decided, strings would be cool in this, right? Yeah, it would. I had Ben sing along with the rough mix, and I recorded Ben singing along, and a lot of his ideas were fighting this or fighting, but a couple of them were like, whoa, I wouldn't have thought of that. So that way, even though I'm the guy that wrote out the string arrangement, the germ of it came from the artist himself. That's the person that actually sang that line that really unlocked the chorus. And then I harmonized it, figured out what the cellos are going to do, blah, blah, blah.
Isn't it amazing how many possible melodies there are to anything that we're listening back to that doesn't have the melody on there yet?
Yep. Let me say something about string melodies.
Yeah.
Lazy string writing is string writing where all the notes just go, if you move from one note to the next, the intervals, you're just a second away. Or maybe you're a minor third away. More adventurous and memorable string writing is when there's broad intervals. The cellos go up an entire sixth, or the violins drop with a slur, they drop an entire octave at one moment and then come back up a fourth. That's the kind of string writing that really says something. Lame string writing is it just stays in the central notes and doesn't really have much breadth.
Yeah, Elliott Smith XO had some beautiful strings on there. I think that was Beck's dad who arranged those strings for him.
Beck's
dive bomb.
David Campbell.
Strings.
David Campbell was a great string arranger.
Yeah.
As was Paul Paul Buckminster.
Yeah.
Buckminster.
Yeah.
No, Buckmaster. The guy that did Buckmaster.
Buckminster made the geodesic domes.
Yeah. Buckmaster was the guy that did the early Elton John strings.
Yeah.
And he was a genius.
And Buckminster only lived to like 53 or something.
Oh, Paul Buckminster?
No, the geodesic
the geodesic guy, yeah.
I think that's
Could
what
be.
And I think he was a polyphasic sleeper. So like he lived on 2 hours of sleep.
Oh, yeah.
Or maybe he didn't live.
Like Jaco Pastorius.
Yeah. So yeah, speaking of living long and making music, I'm a year and a half away from as long as my dad lived. And I'm quite confident that I'm going to keep going. But I think about all of us as we grow older and we do this thing that we do that started out as a young man's game, right? So it's rock, it's like wildness, it's the studio, it's lots of hours, it's making rock music. And I think early on I thought, wow, when I get older, am I going to have to start liking oldies music? Because, you'd see your generations above you and they liked something different. But have you discovered that as we age and make music and make records, that the surprise is that we could just get to keep making the cool shit we like because the audience grows with us?
I know. We're the luckiest people on the planet. We are. It's insane. I can't believe how lucky I am.
But we're going to be listening to punk records as oldies on the oldies station.
I know. It's great.
As geriatrics.
I know. My kids are 10 and 12 and they will listen to the Ramones. It's like the Ramones doesn't sound square to them, It's like the rock era, when the rock era crystallized, it really did set something permanently into place. It's pretty amazing what happened,
Are you finding that you get to continue making stylistically the records that you want to make? Does that change a little bit and evolve as you work with these younger artists too?
A little bit, but really what it comes down to is I just deal if it's a younger artist and what they need is something that I don't want to provide, I just deal myself out. I'm doing it with Ben. This whole Ben Goldsmith thing I just talked about. When we realized we were going to get a record deal and that these 15 songs were going to go out there, I kind of felt like, I've said my say with Ben. And I told him outright, I said, look, we love working with each other. You seem to depend on me a lot, Ben, but I'm not going to produce your second record. You need to get a different producer that's your age or do it yourself. If I did the second record, I would just keep pulling him down and there's a big age difference between he and I. So I really said, you've got to work with someone your own age and you got to start really, and he did. He's actually self-producing right now.
Even though you still act 13, you notice the age difference?
Pretty much. So in other words, I don't force myself. I don't force my square peg into a round hole. If I see a young artist that really wants a young commercial sound, like, all the music that's come in the wake of Billie Eilish or
right.
I just deal myself out. It's like, I'm flattered that you want to work with me, but really you should get someone that wants to do that kind of music right away. Whereas I would be more inclined to lean it more towards organic and pleasure.
So the records that are in that vein of, laptop and microphone, Billie Eilish, that kind of stuff, do you find yourself as a listener exploring those to see what it's all about? Do you enjoy some of those?
There's interesting sounds in there. I don't usually get much human exploration from them. Which is really that's the difference between Brad Jones as a young producer versus Brad Jones as an old producer. But the first iteration of me was looking for cool sounds.
Right.
Always. And now I'm looking for cool humanity. I'm not looking for sounds, I'm looking for human. And if the sounds can play into that, great, but I'm looking for human moments to be peppered throughout every single song.
Yeah.
That's my whole MO now. So that kind of writes me off on some of this music it was written on a laptop, it was constructed, it wasn't really coming from an emotional place in the first place, possibly. So I just deal myself out. There's other people that can do that.
Yeah, I'm always trying to keep my perspective open, my mind open, and not shut out new things. But I do agree. I sometimes I struggle to find the human story in some of the newer music. It's just there's a rigidity to it that's maybe doesn't allow.
It's in there. You just have to look longer.
Yeah.
there's always going to be someone doing amazing music right now somewhere.
Yeah.
But, it's just, you got to wade through a lot now to find it.
Well, it's true. There's so much stuff put out.
It just takes a while.
Back then, like if you met somebody like, you made a record?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Only the really good people were given keys to the shop back then.
Or just people who just simply followed through,
Yeah. Exactly.
Committed enough to do it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So another artist you work with is Ron Sexsmith. I think of what you just said about doing a record and then whether you keep doing it. I know that when you met Ron, you were working with him and playing bass, working with Mitchell Froome, Chad Blake.
Mm-hmm. That's how I met him. I was brought in as the bass player.
Yeah, but then you've continued on and you made a recent record.
Yeah, we were friends. All those years, I'd run into him here and there, and every time I'd run into him, he'd go, "Oh, hey, Brad, I am going to get you to do one of my records, But then I never got a call. But then finally, he called me just last year or the year before last, and we made the one that's out right now. We made that
tell
record.
us about that one.
Oh, it was a joy working with it. He's just the best. I mean, if the people out there in Podland have not heard Ron Sexsmith, just listen to him. He's just, I mean,
he wrote one of the greatest songs ever written, which is Secret Heart.
Secret Heart, yeah. Been covered many times.
Yeah.
He's also kind of in Canada, he's from Toronto, or he's from Ontario, I should say. He's kind of the last man standing. It's like Leonard Cohen was the king of Canadian writing, and then last year, Gordon Lightfoot died, and Gordon Lightfoot was Ron's hero. And now Ron is kind of like the alpha song king, the icon of songwriting of Canada, I think. I can't think of anyone better or more esteemed. Down here, he can't get arrested. Well, I shouldn't say that.
He can get arrested in Lebanon.
Yeah, he wrote a song called Lebanon, Tennessee.
Yeah.
But he is a revered icon in his homeland.
Yeah.
And here he's revered among people that are in the know, people that follow music.
Yeah.
But it's not like he makes hit records or anything, hit singles. But the thing about working with Ron is that, like I've been saying this whole time, is it was my chance to really get with Ron and make what I would try to hope would be the most human record possible from him. So if you listen to the album, it starts out on kind of a vulnerable note. And it ends on a vulnerable note, the first song and the closing song. And then where you really kind of sense his emotion, the first song that opens the album, his emotion kind of comes at you from afar. And then on this closing one, it comes at you from right in front of you. It's real dry and close, and he's right there in front of you. And everything in between is just sort of this cool sonic, carnival-like trip that we took together. There's a lot of variety in the sound. A lot of string arrangements, a lot of woodwinds, because things like an oboe, a single oboe can tug heartstrings way more than a synth pad can.
Right.
So we brought an actual woodwind player in to do some of that heart tugging, just where the song needed it, only when the lyrics sort of justified it, I never want to do any gratuitous heart tugging, but if the lyric is heartfelt, get some sounds in there that are heartfelt.
So again, like strings, you bring in an oboe player. Do you just say, here you go, do some overdubs?
Oh, I wrote the oboe parts.
Okay.
But other times I will let the oboe player just come up with parts.
Same lessons with like singing along into voice memo are really helpful for that.
Right.
That's great. Ron's a sweetheart, and he's got this beautiful, the singers who have that lilting vibrato.
Yeah, lazy.
Emmylou Harris.
Yeah, exactly. A lazy vibrato. Hers is a more insistent kind of vibrato. And Chrissie Hynde has tremolo. You know that she doesn't waver the pitch. Vibrato is, but fast is, Chrissie Hynde does tremolo. It's volume.
Where's Chrissie Hynde from? Isn't she?
She's from Central Ohio.
Yeah. Well, Ryan Humbert, same thing. Tremolo, yeah, but they both hail from from Cleveland, so it must be in Ohio.
It's a tremolo, Ohio thing.
Oh,
tremolo.
It's because it's the Rust Belt and it's riding around in a car with. No, just joking.
It could be.
That's great. No, I love that that discovery of the importance of uniqueness in the human voice too. Like, I just can't stand American Idol and the perspective of singing.
If you can't tell who the singer is, then
the world.
There's a lot of singers out there. They front their band and they get people say live, like, "Man, you're a great singer." It means they were singing in tune the whole gig.
Right.
You put them on record, you can't tell them, but sure they sang fine, but You wouldn't know it's them if you heard them you sound like 20 different singers.
Yeah.
That's where the Ron Sexsmiths come in. You know it's him right away. It's unmistakable.
Yeah, and then there becomes a familiarity to it. I mean, honestly, like, my version is just have a podcast. Have people, if I'm lucky that anybody's listening to this right now, and thank you for doing so, rock stars. But I mean, you're probably so used to hearing my voice. There's a familiarity to it,
Fortunately, you have a very nice speaking voice.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. One of the things that I learned is that I have this sort of quiet, smoky voice. So if we're sitting around in a loud bar, like nobody hears, I can't interject a good joke. It barely gets anybody's attention, never cut through. So I had to make a podcast and stick a mic there and control the mix so that I can be heard clearly.
There's a good, for the rock stars out there that are engineering geeks, there's a good lesson in there. And I learned this from Matthew Sweet. I don't know if anyone remembers Matthew Sweet records, but I played in his band for a year or two.
Yeah.
And
thank God, because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to cut all the cabling in the studio and rebuild it.
That's right. That's where I got my nest egg to get in the studio. That's right. I saved all my per diems. But Matthew said something at sound checks that really got me thinking. I'd never thought about it before. We get to a sound check. Matthew get on the mic, check, 1, 2, and he'd tell the sound man, hey, sound man, my voice, of course, he sounded more like this. He has a more open voice. But he would say, sound man, my voice is kind of like you said about your voice. My voice is kind of a smoky, wispy voice that doesn't have very much mid. So you can put a whole bunch of 1K in there if you want to. And Soundman's like, really? Because Soundman, the first thing Soundman would usually think is, I'm a sound man. I got to turn up a bunch of air, a bunch of 10K, and then I got to make sure it's rich. So I got to turn up enough 200 that it's rich. No Soundman would ever think about cranking some 1.5K. But Matthew said, look, Soundman, there's an actual hole in my voice. You have the opportunity. In fact, you have the need to actually put some mid-range onto my voice so my lyric will be intelligible.
Yeah.
And people think lyrics live around 6K. That's not true. Alexander Graham Bell, who did the science on how to make the first telephone receiver, will be able to tell you that lyrics live between 500 and 2K.
Yep.
That's
Mid-range.
where lyrics really live. That was a great thing. I took from that Matthew Sweet sound check, I took that with me into my recording head. I still, like if I was to record you singing right now, I would instantly look for a broad mid-range to turn up on.
Do you feel like all the time that you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for a simple, straightforward, step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all of your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover the proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Listen to this quote from one of our students, David. Quote, absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information and mentoring on the mixing process I've ever been a part of. That was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session. Close quote. Look, I'm so confident that the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass will take your mixes to the next level that if you can't get a killer mix within 30 days, I'll give you a full refund, no questions asked. So if you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and start now by checking out the free preview of the Ultimate Snare Mixing Trick, and I'll save a seat for you at the front row table at the Grammys. Yeah, and of course, when Matthew's in the studio, he can layer his voice.
That's right.
Which, makes it bigger and thicker and all that. And my voice does well doubled too, I find. But when you're on stage,
but
you can't double yourself.
But I don't know if you've noticed this. People that are lacking in mid-range already, when they double themselves, it kind of compounds the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Doubling is great for silky highs and is great for low warm stuff, but a lot of those mids get canceled out. Mm-hmm. So I find that when I double track somebody, I have to put a little bit more mid-range on that pair of vocals than usual.
I'm going to remember that next time I go to the mix.
You'll see, it's true.
On my stuff too. Yeah. Double tracking is great. What are artists that? Do you know? I'm trying to think of bands where two different people are doubling each other the whole time. I mean, I think of Squeeze, but that was sort of an octave.
Yeah,
trick that they did, which was very cool.
If you have a band where the two singers can double track each other, what a great thing to have.
Yeah.
Man. It's a great tool.
Nothing comes to mind right off the
Well, the
bat,
Beatles
but
were pretty good at it.
Would they double the part?
The very first, well, later Beatles records, when you hear doubling, it's Paul going back and doubling himself.
Oh,
But
right.
on the first
Doubling
couple Beatles
himself,
records, when you hear unison, it's Paul and John on the same mic.
Because they were coming off the stage as a live.
So they learned how to double track each other on stage.
Yeah.
So those first two albums, it's the thing you're describing, two different singers double track at the same time on the same mic. And when you can make that work, it's a great sound.
Yeah,
but it takes a lot more doing, you know. It's a lot easier to double track yourself than to get your pal to figure out your phrasing.
Right.
You know?
I know. Yeah, and it can be, it's really tricky. And it's even hard to work with an artist when they're not used to doubling themselves and get them to double themselves in the studio.
Mm-hmm.
I learned tricks like just go one phrase at a time. Play them the phrase, let them hear what they did, and don't say a word, go into record.
Let
them sing it again. That usually works pretty good.
You know, there's million ways to do it, but one way that comes to mind is something that Roger Joseph Manning taught me. He's the guy I worked with on a band called Imperial Drag.
Right.
He said, we're going to triple this, right? I said, what do you mean triple? He goes, well, you know, we have two doublers. Kind of one's panned a little left and the other's panned a little right. When you do that, it's a great thing because it allows you to be a little looser with your doublers. So I even have people double where they don't even hear the lead vocal. Just sing the song again.
Yeah.
If there's a little thing that's off by an eighth note, I'll just nudge it in Pro Tools later. Don't sweat it. Just sing the song. That way you're singing in tune with the tone you want.
Right.
If you're singing and you're hearing your original vocal in the cans, you're not necessarily singing your overdub with your natural voice. You're kind of cautious. You might not be doing the vowels the way you normally would. So it's kind of less true in a way. So I'm almost more inclined to just do tripling and just go out and sing it two more times, or do it like Bruce Sweden always had Michael Jackson do it. Just do it two more times, but 2 feet away from the mic.
Yeah.
And then I'll just layer that in, a little bit left and a little bit right, but keep your original vocals still the loud ones. That's still the lead horse. That's a great way to do it.
Yeah. Bruce was also famous for doing a lot of stereo miking.
Yeah.
A lot of like coincident XY pair, I think. You know, so it's kind of mono, but it's stereo.
Yeah.
Which I thought was cool.
I mean, just the way he would record an acoustic guitar is so much superior to the standard.
What? Yeah, talk about that. I don't know.
Well, I mean, the one that they teach you in school is you put one small diaphragm condenser, right where the neck meets the body.
Yeah, 12th fret kind of thing.
12th fret. And then the other is kind of back over kind of by where the strummer is, kind of reading the top of the body of the guitar. Bruce Sweden's like, no, put a stereo mic right where it sounds really good to your head and just record it with a single stereo XY or single stereo mic. And that's way better, I think.
Yeah, I remember with Will Kimbrough when I was recording Home Away, he came over here and we were doing various overdubs. Maybe some of us over to Alex the Great because we started that one there as well. But I remember looking for the acoustic guitar tone that sounded best to me because he's such a great guitar player too. And in some of the ways we tried like where's the guitarist's ear and a small diaphragm right at about head height, just looking down.
That can be great.
Above the guitar sounded really good too.
Yeah, that's a great way to do it.
And, that's one of the things that is so great about the beginning of your recording journey is when you're when you're in that searching for all the cool sounds, you try everything.
Yep.
And it's so
That's
critical.
how it should be.
Know?
It's exciting and fun.
Yeah. And then you get efficient and then you got your bunch of stuff and then you get sick of it afterward. And then you got to change it all up.
And then budgets shrink. So you got to make the record quicker. So you just go to the one that you already know works, know, which sadly one of the problems of the lower budget era. But we learned I've had my little tricks that I've cooked up to make it not so bad.
All right, let me see. What do we want to talk about next? All kinds of good stuff. Size and space in recording. We talked about how you think about it in terms of the stereo field of a mix and recording. But let's talk about a studio itself. So you've built, I guess you built one studio, man. You sort of set out to build one, and you've had Alex the Great, and you kept it. Right. But you guys, you and Brad built that. And I remember there were like, you guys, there were like, I think you were having seances in there beforehand, and painting things on the floor to make sure that everything was aligned with the celestial bodies. Or at least those are the stories I heard. just the size of the place and that big room and doing all that. Have you had a variety of experiences with recording in home studio size spaces, and then your space in big spaces? And what do you want to say about that, about the size and shape of rooms for recording all the instruments and making a record sound great?
Well, it sure is a luxury to have one big old space and then have a very dry small space. But you definitely
maybe describe Alex the Great in the rooms so they can picture it too.
It's just sort of a big room with a vaulted wooden ceiling that's probably about 23 by 23, something like that. And then there on one wall, there are a whole row of glass doors, French doors, that open up. So the whole wall kind of opens up, and that opens up into our ISO booth, which is way bigger than an ISO booth. I mean, it's big enough to have a grand piano and a couple drum sets and a horn section. It's big enough,
Softer walls too. You want more treatments in there.
But I mean, in a nutshell, what I was going to say about big versus small is the ideal combination, if you want the two basic food groups, have the largest room that you can make, that you can afford, and keep it fairly live. And then if you have a small ISO booth, have a dead booth. But the last thing you want is the opposite. A big old space that's dry and then a small booth that's got sheetrock. Right. That's the opposite. You don't want that, Yeah,
because everything's boingy in that small space.
You don't want flutter echoes.
Although you're welcome to do an overdub in there where you're like, that was that sound on that one song.
Yeah. If you like that kind of thing, sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, sometimes, the fun thing about doing a guerrilla style recording, which is what I used to call, when I worked with living things and we spent a decade in a million different studio settings, home studios, you're in some rental apartment and the vocals are done in the hallway and you get all these wacky kind of sounds of spaces, different spaces. That can be fun, but
it's great.
Becomes everything. Like my studio, a lot of times the scratch vocals are always in my kitchen zone, and it's it's got a particular size and shape and echo to it that you can't get rid of, but it sounds kind of cool. It's kind of fun. Sometimes it's like,
well, listen to Jimmy Page. Jimmy Page and Led Zeppelin were mastered. They were just restless people and creative people. So Jimmy Page would never start with a 57 right on the cone of his Marshall. It was always about putting the mic at a skew or on the other side of a tiled bathroom or at the top of a stairway or whatever it was. It's like they were wah-wah, half-cocked. They were never satisfied with just the straightforward way. And they got really interesting sounds.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember one of the first times I learned how to do an interesting guitar recording. I think we had the amp maybe with the 57 or something in the big room. And then you said, let's open the door to the tile room. So the lounge at Alex the Great is Saltillo tile, which I replicated in my dining room here. If you'd forgotten that, I'll have to show it to you again. But it sort of gives it a little bit of aliveness. And then we took the Gaffel, what is it, the UM70 microphone? Great mic.
I still use it.
Yeah.
All the time.
I still don't have one. What's wrong with me?
You got to get you one.
Got to get one. But put that out in the tile room. And then the guitar was like, you could pan the amp to one side and then this sound of the room through a little bit of distressor. It's a great tool for
you could squash the hell out of the room and then just keep the close mic real unaffected and you get a great sound.
Pan the room to the other side of the stereo image.
Or even if they're pan mono, you still get a great dimension in your sound. Yeah. Either way you win.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, cool. So then mixing. Let's talk about mixing. So you've got your setup with the small speakers to mix. What about mixing template? Have you found that there are ways that you set up your mix, your stereo bus, any parallel routings or those kind of things that you repeat?
I do have kind of my routing thing that I use. Although I always do that in the second stage. The first stage is just listening to those 23 tracks, not going through anything besides just the 23 tracks. And I try to organize them and get the ideas going. And then once I start going for the actual sound and balance, then I'll bring some bus compression in on it. And my typical thing is I'm very, very, very dedicated to getting that singer who sang straight into an SM7 or a condenser or whatever it was, to the listeners' ears that are at home listening on Spotify. I want to get that performance to those people's ears with the least shit in between possible. So I will not, if I compress the track, I make sure that the vocal bypasses that compressor through routing.
Interesting. So the vocal might go straight to the stereo,
straight to my print
output, but the band is going.
The band goes through
bus
its
compressor.
own band. Well, if I'm doing stems, I might have a sub mix where the drums have their own left-right mix. I put a compressor on them, and then that would feed to my general compressor, which is what I call the band compressor, to everybody except for the lead singer. And I tend to use a 3-channel multiband compressor on that.
The Combinator?
No.
That's a classic.
I have used the Combinator before. I like the McDSP one very much.
Oh, right
it's the
on.
DSP 2000. It's real simple, straightforward, sounds great, easy to use. It's just like a lot of my plugins. I like the earlier plugins because they're straightforward and they're not trying to seduce you with this fake wood veneer that they put on and little buttons you can't get to and mystery buttons that are called something that you have to go to the manual and figure out. I like real straightforward plugins. So I will do that. Sometimes I will put the PSP Vintage Warmer on the whole band as well. And between those two plugins, I can usually kind of get the band sound that is just right for me to send to the masterer, and then let the masterer do the last layer of compression himself.
That's great.
So I don't hit my compressors very hard.
When I was out at NAMM, I saw Colin McDowell, McDSP was there with his booth, and then Antony from PSP Audio. Those guys over from Poland.
Those guys are
making
great.
cool stuff. They've got a bunch of new plugins.
They're
too
really good.
I
love the PSP stuff. So great. But anyway, that's kind of my mix architecture.
Well, that's
and
cool.
then let me take it a step further. I'm almost inclined to not give away the trade secrets, but people are probably too lazy to even try this anyway. So since the band is being treated with this multi-band compressor, and you set your crossover points wherever you want them to be, my typical mid-band crossover point would be somewhere like from 250 up to 2.5 or maybe 3K. So because we can automate that plugin, that 3-band multi-band compressor, I can look at my Pro Tools session and I can put the vocal up left to right. I'm seeing all 3 minutes of the singer. I see the blobs where he's singing, and then I see the blobs where he's not singing, and I will actually dip the multi-band's output only on the middle band. Because remember we were talking about Alexander Graham Bell, and those are the frequencies where lyrics live, 500 to 2K. I dip the entire band, only a dB or two, just while the singer's singing. And then the minute he gets done singing that phrase, the band's mid-range sort of reclaims for those 3 bars.
So it's like you're making a space for the vocal.
Right. And I got the idea from listening to FM radio, or maybe AM radio, but you listen to those kind of crazy compressors that radio stations use. It's like he's singing, I can hear every note he's singing. And then when he stops singing, whoa, the guitars kind of lurch in. That's exciting. Well, I'm just doing a manual version of that, basically. And it's a real great way to have your cake and eat it, too, and make a very exciting mix.
Very cool. Very cool. And I mean, you can just draw it in, too.
I draw it.
I know.
I draw it by
sometimes
hand.
the nerdy engineer in us is like, do we set up a complicated side chain thing, everything that's like...
I can do it by hand in about 4 or 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And I would prefer to do it by hand. Same
is.
way I do my pitch correction. I never, ever let the robot decide. I never have auto-tune on auto. It's always by hand. And I never put people on the actual 0 perfect note. If they were 30 cents flat, I'll put them up to 10 cents flat. You know what I mean?
Right, because there was a an intention maybe in where they went.
Yeah, or even if there wasn't an intention, I just don't want one of those records where at the end of the 3 minutes, you got a sense that, that's just kind of, I wasn't moving me, but I don't know why.
Right.
It's because the singer disappeared into perfection. And you know what wabi-sabi is, right? Do you know the concept of wabi-sabi?
No, it's wabi-sabi.
Wabi-sabi is a Japanese aesthetic philosophy. And like, for instance, I was at Ladybird Tacos a couple days ago on Leland. And they had this beautiful bookshelf that they built into the wall using wood that had like wormholes in it. And then there was pottery that they'd chosen, and some of the pottery had little imperfections in it. That's wabi-sabi. if you have a pot that was handmade and fired up in a real kiln, it'll have weird little imperfections in it that you want to touch, and that you can sense you can almost vibe on the hands of the creator, the guy that made that pot. Whereas if that pot was made at a factory and made perfectly and made out of lucite, you wouldn't get any sense of the person that made it. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So in my music, because I'm going for a more human thing now, I'm always trying to show the hand of the person that made the music. And Wabi Sabi is any of your rock stars should just go to Wikipedia and type in Wabi Sabi and see if they can use that way of thinking to apply to their sounds.
I think that's great. I love that. And it's nice when there's sort of like a fancy term to help explain what we were already feeling. I mean, for me, the thing about the imperfections, I mean, the humanness is an experience of imperfection, right? I mean, you think about the Tibetan monks making these huge mandalas, I think that's what they're called, right? With the sand.
I've seen them do it.
And they would intentionally, they'd get so good at it, it was perfect.
They put a flaw in.
They intentionally put a flaw
The
in.
Navajos did that too with the Navajo rugs that are famous that you buy in there. They would always intentionally put one little flaw in there. They might have had some religious reason for doing that. They didn't want to compete with God or something.
Right.
But in the case of sound and Wabi Sabi, you don't want to have a bunch of disfigurations in your record. And the Japanese Wabi Sabi says, you don't need to make the whole pot have a bunch of flaws. Just one flaw is enough.
Right.
That's all you need, just to remind the viewer that this was a human artifact and not a machine artifact.
Well, my band is we're so good that we don't even have to try to put a flaw in. They just make a natural appearance into the recording.
This podcast is proud to present Recording Studio Rockstars Academy. Are you ready to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level and make your best record ever? Then visit the Academy to find the course that's right for you. Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you're ready to start mastering your own records at home, then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly how I master my own records using nothing but plugins. Plus, I take you into a world-class mastering studio, Sterling Sound, to meet with Ryan Smith and hear how he professionally mastered my record, Skadoosh, for release to streaming platforms. That's the music you hear on this podcast, Rockstars. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free mixing course, Mix Master Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins and Pro Tools. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads for you to practice mixing and even upload to your website if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy to get started now.
I've experienced that in the vocal tuning realm because it's one of the key elements of music making that we gained, this bizarre level of control over in the 90s when autotune appeared. And and Melodyne particularly. And what I discovered was when I perfectly tuned a track, I felt the emotion go away. And I realized it's because what we hear is part of it is we hear a singer going through the human effort to reach a note.
That's right.
And if it just goes straight to the note, then it sounds effortless. And when you hear, you go to a Disney showcase or something like that, and you've got these, career singers that they just perfectly do the dance steps and hit the notes, and it seems effortless. But you watch a Summer Olympics and a young teen gymnast, pulling this off for the first time, and it's so compelling.
Yeah, the effort.
It's like you have to see, you have to experience that, and
it's visceral. And sensing the other person's effort brings you bodily into it.
Right. You empathize too, and you get pulled in. And like and coming up to the note, but being slightly flat, you hear that attempt to get up there, or you hear a relaxedness that says, "I'm going to stay in this, relaxed."
And don't short sell sharpness too. Like if you listen to like Joe Strummer, when he sings sharp, it's his way of being punky or pugilistic.
Right.
There's a real thing to it. Like if they would have had a Melodyne on that first Clash, any of the Clash records, it really would have screwed up what his intention was. He didn't know that was his intention, but subconsciously he knew that if he pushed it a little beyond the note, it would have this kind of spit on the microphone attitude to it.
Yeah. And there's a thing, I think, just the human, your own head, you lose your pitch reference too. You're singing beyond your reference in the headphones. I learned pitch reference from you is the bass. I learned make sure the singer can hear the bass in the headphones because that's the pitch reference on this. Yeah. And the other place where that applies is timing of musicians. The way a punk band comes together and like nobody's perfectly on the beat or in the pocket behind the beat. The guitar player's pulling so-and-so's land behind, and it's the way it all adds up that makes that sound.
That's right.
You straighten it out, and all of a sudden you're like, that doesn't sound right.
A good band should have its unique chemistry. Don't mess with that.
So I got one more question, then close out question for you if you got a moment. You play a bunch of instruments. Talk about how you keep your musical chops alive. In the studio.
The way I keep my bass chops alive is to take a live gig once in a while, which forces me to rehearse.
Yeah.
If I didn't practice, I probably would atrophy a little bit on bass. Another thing I try to do is always try to pick up a new instrument if possible. And my one the last couple of years has been the recorder. You remember in grade school, they teach you to play Mary Had a Little Lamb on this recorder and the whole music class would do it?
Yeah.
Well, I kept mine.
And it's a great tone, too.
And then I got the bigger ones, the big tenor recorder, and then the large one. And now that I have all three sizes, I can do my own flute mellotron parts without using a mellotron.
That's cool.
I can do them by hand. And then my pitch isn't very good because I'm not really a recorder player, but I can fix the pitches later,
Yeah.
So that's been my current thing. I always try to have some little thing I'm trying to learn and use, it kind of keeps you alive.
That's fun. I was going back and I was watching, I pulled up a YouTube video of Jill Sobule, I Kissed a Girl, and there it was MTV 120 Minutes. And who's that on the next mic next to her playing the harmonica? It was you rocking out for the live performance. And I don't think I'd heard you play harmonica.
I learned how to play harmonica when I was doing long road trips, and I just have it in the car and just go down the interstate at 65 miles an hour, steer with one hand and harmonica with the other.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's how I taught myself how to do tube and throat singing.
Oh, is that right?
Well, yeah, I just practiced into a little handheld cassette recorder.
While you're driving?
Until I hit it, and then I played it back, and I was like, oh my God, that was it.
I need to
do that again.
I need to hear your tube.
Well, I haven't done it since then, so I can probably work back up to it. Let me go to the closing question. This one is our Wayback Studio machine, which is that was also recommended as a name for the podcast studios, the Wayback Studio or the Wayback Machine.
No, Wayback Machine has been taken. It's do you know the famous Internet Archives, which everyone in Rockstar Land should have this on their speed dial websites. It's a fantastic website that is nonprofit. It's a consortium of libraries across the nation that are like making available something you can't get elsewhere, like a Jelly Roll Morton recording from 1931, or a weird short that Martin Scorsese made that never made it to theaters. They have it at the Internet Archives, and all you have to type in is Internet Archives.
I think they.
And once you get there, there's a sub tab you can go to that's called the Wayback Machine. And it has a bunch of the real kitschy pop culture fun stuff that you can just spend days just exploring in there.
That's groovy. I think they also do historical snapshots of the internet. So when when you go back to that
probably do
to that website and wait a minute, something's missing.
Historic photo
just here last time.
Yeah, historic photographs. It's just everything's in there. It's awesome.
That's cool stuff.
It's nonprofit. It's not trying to upsell us. There's no links to buy.
Yeah.
It's so refreshing to be a true nonprofit.
Yeah. All right. Well, so this is our Wayback Studio machine, and you're just going to go back in time and find young Brad, and you're playing your guitar. Maybe you're just like, this Kent rules. $30 is a lot of money though, back then. And you tap yourself on the shoulder and say, I've come back to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. What advice would you go back and give yourself if you could, Mr. Jones?
Vote early and vote often, I guess. So like immerse yourself, listen to everything you can.
Yeah.
Listen to all different kinds of music if possible. Now, when I was 12, I could only listen to whatever music I could find on vinyl that was nearby or that my guitar teacher would lend me, but now if you're 12, you have the opportunity of going online and immersing yourself in, chicha music or, bossa nova or Japanese ambient music. You can immerse yourself so much. And at that age, I mean, that's the thing. My boy's that age. So I keep telling him that. It's like, kid, whatever you listen to between now and when you're 16 is going to embed itself into your psyche. So be careful what you listen to. Don't listen to something that you think is just trite, because you might end up liking it and then you're stuck with it your whole life.
Yeah.
You're such a sponge at that age. But it's what an opportunity to explore all the different worlds' musics at that age while you're still a sponge. And like, I had to play catch up. And, since I didn't start learning about bossa nova till I was 30, it took me 3 times as long to really get to the bottom of it.
Yeah.
But if I would have been immersing myself when I was 13, I would have really known that kind of music inside and out by the time I was 14.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I think that's good. That's
so
good
breadth
advice.
is what I would recommend too.
And I will say, I spend a lot of time watching YouTube. So what I've noticed is that it tries to pay attention to it, and general it, like, probably doesn't matter which one you look at. It's probably the algorithm's trying to figure out, like, what are you into? We're going to show you more of that. So so that can be very effective, because if you're watching lots of bossa nova videos, it
you just get more
starts feeding you
bossa, right?
But what also happens, which is a good reminder, is it'll pivot away to your latest interest too, and it won't bring you back there. So sometimes you have to like pause and go like, I want to be more intentional, and so go search. Remember to keep searching,
Exactly,
so that it keeps showing you.
And
the
don't be
stuff.
passive in your search.
Yeah.
Set out a goal for, I'm going to immerse myself in this for the next 3 months, and it's just a way of, it's the difference between going shallow and going deep.
Yeah.
And I know I said breadth is the main thing I would advise young Bradley, but also not just breadth, but if you can get breadth and depth. I know it's not easy to do both, but try to get both if you can.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, if you're listening to this podcast, you're already going deep. So there we go.
That's right.
Dude, thanks so much for hanging with us again on
Always
the
a joy.
show. Great to have you back. Let the rock stars know, where should they go if they want to just learn more about young Bradley, middle Bradley, old Bradley, and if they want to check out Alex the Great, or if they want to come make their next hit record with you and reach out to you. Where would you like the rock stars to go?
They just come over to the house, I guess.
Come over to the house.
I mean, I actually still do phone calls. I love to get a phone call from someone that say, you don't know me, but I'm blah, blah, blah. And I love that. I love getting a phone call. My phone number is right there on the website. People can call me whenever they want
AlexTheGreatRecording.com.
That's
right?
it.
Okay, great. Yeah.
And that's not really a kept up website. All it is sort of a billboard that shows basic photographs of what the place looks like.
That's what websites are these days.
Yeah, and there's not much to it.
Card.
Although we do have a Spotify list that's attached to it that shows you a lot of the stuff that's been recorded there by me and by others.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty good list to listen to. Shows a lot of variety.
Great. Yeah. So check that out, Rockstars. And then again, we have Brad's playlist in the show notes too. So scroll down. Go listen to the great records he's making. Brad, thanks for hanging with us.
My pleasure.
Rockstars, thanks for listening.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers, man.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible: Grace Design, Atom Audio, Native Instruments, and Isotope. And remember, at isotope.com and nativeinstruments.com, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin purchase. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, please check out our sponsors using the links in our show notes, because it's a great way to help support this show. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars: Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and Liz Hulitskaya. Thanks so much for listening, Rockstars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.